Good morning. Good morning. We're about to start, and so I encourage you, please, to silence your phones, and then we'll start. Good morning. This is the academic talk series in celebration of Kasaetsart University's 80th anniversary. The presentation today is entitled Rationality: What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, and Why It Matters, which will be presented by our guest, Professor Steven Pinker from Harvard University in the United States. I'm Professor Matthew Downs. I'm irrelevant. I am doing the announcing today. I've been here at Kasaetsart for 10 years, and it's my honor to be announcing today. All right, so let me give you a summary of our proceedings today. This morning we'll start with an opening ceremony. It'll be short and sweet. They'll be followed by the group photo session with invited guests to the stage. After that, then we'll have the presentation by Dr. Pinker, which will take us to lunch. Lunch will be a short break of about an hour. The afternoon, we will have 4 researchers, professors, academics who will present their research and topics related to the topic today on rationality. After that, Dr. Pinker has been very kind and offered to meet you and to sign a copy of his book if you have the book with you. And we'll meet afterwards. He will meet you afterwards on stage at the end of the proceedings today. All right, so let's go forward with the opening ceremony. I wish to invite Associate Professor Kampanat Pensupa, who is Vice President for International Affairs at Kasaetsart University, to give us an opening speech, welcoming speech.
Good morning, Professor Steven Pinker, Dr. Jonglak Vachat, President of Kasaetsart University, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor for me to extend our warmest welcome to Professor Steven Pinker and the participants from university across the country. I would like to convey my appreciation to the team from the Faculty of Humanities and the International Affairs Division for collaborating the invite Professor Pinker, one of the world's most influential academic and thinker, that he be here today. His most recent book and his lecture today, Rationality: What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters, are relevant to the humanities, social science, and other related disciplines. I'm confident that the faculty member and students from various faculty at Kasaetsart University and the other university will be inspired by Professor Pinker's observation and scholarships. After Dr. Pinker's talk in the afternoon, please join the section which will feature presentation by the academic researcher whose work have been influenced by the Professor Pinker writing. Finally, at the conclusions, the presentation will be glad to be hosted at the book signing. Professor Pinker has kindly agreed to sign his most recent book for you. Once again, I extend the each of you a very warm welcome to Kasaetsart University. Thank you very much. สวัสดีครับ
Thank you for your welcome remarks. Now we'd like to invite the Dean of Faculty of Humanities, Assistant Professor Tong Grok Ruan Tang Bang Tung, to give a report and talk a little bit about the background of our program today.
It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome all of you in my capacity as a Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Kasaetsart Universities. Let me begin by providing some information about this event. Today's event is co-hosted and organized by Kasaetsart University and Faculty of Humanities. One purpose of this event is to celebrate the 80th anniversaries of Kasaetsart University. The key aspect of Kasaetsart University's mission is to equip each new generation of students with the capacity and knowledge to become creative thinkers, enabling them to engage in lifelong learning, stimulating them to create innovation for sustainable national development. One way of fulfilling these fundamental goals is by providing critical reflection and discourse on various important topics. We are delighted that Professor Steven Pinker, a world-renowned psycholinguist who has authored many publications on language, cognition, social relations, had accepted our invitation to give us a special lecture, Nationalities, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters. We are pleased that the event attracted hundreds of faculty, researchers, and students from Kasaetsart University and from other universities in Bangkok and from across the country. On behalf of the Faculty of Humanities, I welcome you, and we are honored to have this special opportunity to co-host Professor Pinker's lecture today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean, for your report. Now I'd like to invite our president, Dr. John Wachavrimrat, to please address us with his opening speech.
Professor Steven Pinker, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Kasaetsart, I'm honored to share this opening ceremony of Professor Pinker talk. Rational, what it is, why it seems scarce, it matters. Let me a personal warm welcome to Professor Steven Pinker and the participants and presenters from Thai University. I will take this opportunity to express sincere appreciation to our speakers, Professor Steven from Harvard University, to Kasaetsart University. We are delighted and have thinkers, scholar, and authors speak to us. I'm especially glad that a large number of academic staff and students have joined us. I'm confident that Professor Pinker's speech will be inspiring to all of you. I'm sure you will gain new insight for our research or for living your life in today's chaotic world. I encourage each of you to consider the Pinker word carefully. Universities, reputation in particularly in agriculture and forestry. Kasaetsart University also places great importance on the development of human and social value, with a key force that guide our global society. Dr. Pinker will focus on topics that are important to all of us. I would like to take this opportunity to express sincere appreciation to the organizing committees, the Faculty of Humanities, and the International Affairs Division for making this event happen. I will now conclude my opening remark by wishing all of you a rewarding time with Professor Steven Pinker. Thank you. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you, Dr. Jongrok. I'm going to cause and ask us to pause for a moment until we get the audio fixed. I think the staff should fix the audio. It's working okay? Okay. It's okay. All right, okay. It's been rectified. We can proceed. All right, now we have the group photo. So invite the people who have been invited for the group photo to please come to the stage. They will be escorted. The rest of you may use this opportunity to take discreet selfies. Okay, one more bit of housekeeping. The proceedings today are being video recorded. It'll be available on a restricted basis. If you were to make an inquiry of the organizers by email, they can make it available to you. All right, it is my distinct honor now to actually introduce Dr. Pinker. Professor Steven Pinker is an experimental psychologist who conducts research in visual cognition, psycholinguistics, and social relations. He grew up in Montreal, Canada, and earned his BA from McGill University, and later received his PhD from Harvard University. Currently, he is the John Stone Professor of Psychology at Harvard, but he's also taught at Stanford University in California and at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He has won numerous prizes for his research, his teaching, and his books, including The Language Instinct, How the Mind Works, The Blank Slate, The Better Angels of Our Nature, The Sense of Style, and Enlightenment Now. He is an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, a two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist, a Humanist of the Year, and a recipient of 9 honorary doctorates. Foreign Policy Journal has referred to him as one of the world's top 100 public intellectuals. Time magazine listed him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world today. He has been chair of the usage panel of the American Heritage Dictionary. He writes frequently for the New York Times, The Guardian, and other publications. Dr. Pinker's 12th book, published in 2021, titled Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters, is the title of his talk today. Dr. Pinker. Please welcome him.
It is a great honor to help you celebrate the 80th anniversary of Kasaetsart University. I would like to thank the university for the invitation, to thank the president and dean for their warm welcome, to thank the members of the faculty and staff who have shown great hospitality and kindness to me and to my wife, Dr. Rebecca Goldstein. We have just begun to experience the beauty and the stimulation of your beautiful city and beautiful country. So I thank you for having me here today, and I congratulate the members of the university. I am here this morning to speak to you about rationality, which poses a big puzzle, a big challenge. On the one hand, our species is capable of tremendous feats of rationality. We have walked on the moon and taken pictures of our planet. We have explored the outer reaches of the galaxy and the universe. We have begun to understand the basis of life and mind. We have pushed back against the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the threats to human well-being that made our ancestors sick and miserable throughout human history. We've reduced the death toll from war, from famine, from extreme poverty, from child mortality. However, at the same time, a majority of Americans between the ages of 18 and 24 think that astrology is very or sort of scientific. Large proportions believe in conspiracy theories, such as the theory that COVID-19 vaccines are actually microchips that Bill Gates is trying to inject into our bodies to exercise surveillance over us. Or the QAnon conspiracy theory in the United States, that the United States government houses a conspiracy of cannibalistic, Satan-worshiping pedophiles. Many people spread and believe fake news, like Joe Biden calls Trump supporters dregs of society. Never happened. Or Yoko Ono, I had an affair with Hillary Clinton in the 1970s. Did not happen. And large proportions believe in paranormal, what we call woo-woo, irrational beliefs like possession by the devil, extrasensory perception, ghosts and spirits, and spiritual energy in mountains, trees, and crystals. So how do we explain this, this puzzle, how our species can be so rational and so irrational? That is what I tried to do in my book, Rationality. Well, let me begin at the beginning. The most fundamental question is, what is rationality? I define it as the use of knowledge to attain goals. Now let me illustrate what I mean by that. I'm going to read you a quotation from one of my favorite philosophers and psychologists, William James, famous American philosopher and psychologist. The building that I work at Harvard University is called William James Hall in his honor. And here is how William James, more than 100 years ago, tried to identify the difference between a being that we would want to call rational, namely a human being, and a being that is superficially similar in its behavior, but that we would not want to call rational. So James writes, Romeo wants Juliet as the filings want the magnet. And if no obstacles intervene, he moves toward her by as straight a line as they. But Romeo and Juliet, if a wall be built between them, do not remain idiotically pressing their faces against the opposite sides like the magnet and filings with the card. Romeo soon finds a circuitous way, by scaling the wall or otherwise, of touching Juliet's lips directly. With the filings, the path is fixed. Whether it reaches the end depends on accidents. With the lover, it is the end which is fixed. The path may be modified indefinitely. That's rationality. Well, it then raises a second question: how can knowledge be used to attain goals? And the answer comes from normative models. Norm meaning what is correct, what is recommended. These are models that explain how one ought to reason to attain particular goals, how one should reason, and also to how to avoid common fallacies, mistakes in reasoning that human beings often make. And a large part of my book, Rationality, 7 chapters, explains 7 different normative models that I think every educated person should understand. The first and most obvious is logic. That tells us how we can deduce new propositions from existing ones. And it helps us avoid logical fallacies or errors or mistakes, like the fallacy of affirming the consequent. If you have a statement, if P, then Q, and you know P, you can conclude Q. However, if you have the statement, if P, then Q, and if you know Q, you cannot work backwards and assume P. That is the fallacy of affirming the consequent. So here's an example of the fallacy. Every creative genius was laughed at in his time. They laughed at Einstein, they laughed at Edison. People laugh at my ideas, therefore I am a creative genius. That's an example of the fallacy of affirming the consequent. A second normative model is probability. The likelihood of an event depends on the number of occurrences as a proportion of the number of opportunities. That helps us avoid fallacies like the availability bias. That is a term that was introduced by the great psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for his research on fallacies in reasoning. The availability bias says that the subjective likelihood of an event depends on how easily you can recall anecdotes and images, things that are available in memory. For example, if people read in the newspaper one morning that someone was killed by a shark on a beach, then they think that swimming is very dangerous. It must be that you always get eaten by sharks, because they can remember the story about the person who was eaten by a shark. Here is an illustration of the availability bias. It comes from a cartoon. The caption is, "This is why people should learn statistics." And a woman says, "I will not fly in a plane. They aren't safe from terrorists. Hold on, I'll text you an article about it." Now, the joke here is that it's much, much, much more dangerous to text while you're driving, though there are many, many thousands of people who get killed in car accidents every year. Very, very, very few people get killed in terrorist attacks, but terrorist attacks get a lot of publicity in websites and newspapers and television news, whereas car crashes, even though they are much more plentiful, they don't get a big headline on page 1. A third normative model is called Bayes' rule or Bayes' theorem, named after the 18th century Reverend Thomas Bayes. It's one of the most important theorems in the study of probability. It is a rule about how we should adjust our degree of belief in a hypothesis according to the evidence. And it says we should give credence to a hypothesis, that is, our degree of belief should vary, to the extent that, number one, it's credible a priori, that is, everything that you know so far makes the hypothesis likely. It's consistent with the evidence, of course, and the evidence is uncommon across the board. So if you're diagnosing a disease and someone says they have a headache, that is a very common symptom. It's very hard to attribute that to a particular disease like COVID or malaria or cancer or a brain tumor, because many, many diseases give you headaches. This helps us avoid fallacies like base rate neglect, also identified by Tversky and Kahneman. I'll give you an example. This is a real-life example. A woman goes to a doctor because her 2-year-old daughter has twitches, involuntary movements of the face, and the doctor says, well, she has a nervous twitch, so she probably has Tourette syndrome. This is an example of base rate neglect, because Tourette syndrome is very, very rare in the population. There are many, many reasons that a child might twitch. So even though it's true that if you have Tourette syndrome, then you twitch, it's not true that if you twitch, you have Tourette syndrome. The theory of rational choice, yet another normative model. A rational actor chooses the option with the greatest expected utility. That means the probability that it will occur multiplied by the payoff, what you gain, what you lose. That helps us avoid fallacies like buying extended warranties. When you buy a product, at least in the United States, they also try to sell you a warranty. If, let's say, your camera or your music player comes with a 1-year warranty, they'll say, well, you can get a 5-year warranty if you pay an additional 25% or 30%. But if you worked out the probability times the payoff, let's see, does this work? Yes. Then you think about the probability that your appliance will fail, multiplied by the cost to repair it, and it is probably much less than 30% of the price of the product. It's like taking out a life insurance policy on your toaster. That is not a rational choice. Maybe a better example is people who text while they drive. The positive payoff is you get to read your Facebook update half an hour sooner. The price that you might pay is a certain probability of dying in a car crash. That is not a rational choice. The theory of signal detection, also called the theory of statistical decisions. Now, a fallible observer, and that means all of us, can never know whether something you see in the world is real, that is, it's a signal, or it's bogus, it's noise, it's nothing. You must set a decision cutoff that trades off the costs of misses. Miss means you don't say you see it even if it is there, or a false alarm. You say you do see it, but it's not there, according to its costs. This helps us deal with fallacies. Some people say, for example, we should deal with misconduct, with breaking rules, with infractions, by making it easier to convict someone who is accused of breaking the rules. The problem is, yes, that will mean that more guilty people will be punished. But it also means that more innocent people will be punished if all you're doing is you're changing the decision cutoff and you're not changing the ability to tell apart the signal, that is the true cases, from the noise, the false cases. A sixth theory, normative model, is game theory. This is how to make rational choices when the payoffs depend on someone else's rational choices. This helps us avoid fallacies like the following. We can avoid climate change if we just convince everyone that it is in their best interest to conserve, because no one wants to live in a hotter planet with more fires and floods and heat waves. The problem is that it is not in anyone's individual interest to conserve unless everyone else is conserving at the same time. If you conserve, you take the bus instead of driving, you don't put on your thermostat on a hot day, you do the suffering, but your behavior is not going to save the planet, it's not going to prevent climate change, whereas everyone else is enjoying their nice cool apartments and their nice drive on the freeway. Only if everyone makes the sacrifice is it rational for you to make the sacrifice. Finally, this is the seventh normative model that I explain in the book, The Theory of Causal Inference. To distinguish causation from correlation, one has to manipulate the putative cause, holding all else constant. This helps us avoid fallacies like failing to rule out confounds, variables that are correlated with the cause, but that aren't the actual cause. I'll give you an example from an old joke from my grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1900 in Poland, and he liked to tell the story about the man who ate huge amounts of bean stew with a cup of tea. Then he lay moaning in pain on the couch, saying that the tea made him sick. That's a joke from everyday people that explains the fallacy of failing to rule out the confound, because of course it was the bean stew that made him sick. The tea was just a correlated, confounded variable. Okay, so those are, I just explained to you 7 ways of being rational, and the question is, what about humans? Do people follow normative models of rationality? And that's another way of asking the question, are humans rational or irrational? Do they follow these normative models? Well, let me give you an example from logic. I'll give you 2 examples. The first one is from logic. I want you to consider this rule. Okay? Every card has a number on one side and a letter on the other. Here is a rule. If a card has a D on one side, then it has a 3 on the other side. Okay? Very simple rule. Now I'm going to show you 4 cards, and your task is to identify which cards do you have to turn over to see whether this rule is true or false. Okay? So there is a D card, there is a card with an F, there is a card with a 3, and a card with a 7. Now I want you to think about this for a minute. If there is a D on one side, then there is a 3 on the other. Which cards do you have to turn over? Okay? Think about it to yourself. This is a task that has been given to thousands of people for almost 60 years. Many, many, many psychologists have given this test. The majority of people say either the D card or the D card and the 3 card. The correct answer is the D card and the 7 card. Why? Well, let's think it through. Everyone knows you have to turn over the D card, because if you turn it over and there isn't a 3, then the rule is false. Everyone knows you don't have to turn over the F card, okay? Now, many people think that you do have to turn over the 3 card, but when you think about it, that's irrelevant. The rule says if D on one side, then 3 on the other, not if 3 on one side, then a D on the other. People who think that you have to turn over the 3 card are committing the fallacy of affirming the consequent. But you do have to turn over the 7 card. Because let's say you turned over the 7 card and there was a D on it. Well, then the rule, if D, then 3, has been falsified. But almost no one thinks of turning over the 7 card, even though that is the correct answer. The phenomenon is called confirmation bias. Namely, people tend to seek evidence that confirms their hypothesis. They're not so clever about seeking out evidence that disconfirms their hypothesis. Okay, now I'm going to give you a second example. Remember I told you about Bayes' rule or Bayes' theorem? Here is an example of a Bayesian inference. Okay, the probability that a woman has breast cancer is 1%. If a woman has breast cancer, the probability that she tests positive on a medical test is 90%. If a woman does not have breast cancer, the probability that she still tests positive is 9%. That is the false positive rate of the test. A woman tests positive. What is the chance that she actually has the disease breast cancer? Okay, why don't you all stop for a second and try to think about this. Now, again, this is a test that's been done with thousands of people to test their rationality. The most popular answer, even among a sample of doctors, is between 80 and 90%. The correct answer, according to Bayes' theorem, is 9%. That's a big difference, and what it means is your doctor probably does not understand how to interpret a medical test result according to the mathematics of probability, Bayes' theorem. The phenomenon is sometimes called base rate neglect. I mentioned this before. People ignore the priors, that is, the prior probability, in this case, the 1% chance that any woman does have the disease, and they base their judgments on stereotypes. So if the disease is rare in the population, just 1%, if the test is not perfect, some of the positive results are false positives, what it means is that overall, most of the positives are likely to be false positives just because the disease is so rare. But people don't think, they don't start off by realizing the disease is rare, so the positives are probably false positives. All they think about is, if you have the disease, 90% probability that the test will show a result. Okay, what do these fallacies show? Well, one interpretation is the one from Mr. Spock, the Vulcan member of the original television program Star Trek. Humans are irrational. But not so fast. Let me give you a twist on the logic problem. Here is a law. If someone in a bar is drinking beer, he must be over 21 years of age. You are a bouncer in a bar. You have to enforce the rule. Who do you have to check? There is a guy who's drinking beer. Do you have to ask for his identification card so that he proves that he's over 21? There's a guy who's drinking Coca-Cola. Do you have to check his identification card? There's a guy, an old man, he's clearly over 21. Do you have to look into his cup to see what he's drinking? And then there is a very young man, almost a child. Do you have to look into his cup to see what he's drinking? Well, now everyone gets the answer right. Everyone knows you've got to check the age of the person drinking beer. You've got to check the drink of the person who is under 21. But this is identical to the problem with the cards. If D, then 3. Now, everyone is a logical genius. It's sometimes called the content effect. People are illogical with abstract symbols, X and Y and P and Q, but they can be logical with certain kinds of content that's meaningful to them, such as social obligations and social precautions. Then everyone is a logician. Let me give you a twist now on the probability problem. 10 in every 1,000 women have breast cancer. Of the 10 women with breast cancer, 9 will test positive. Of the 990 women who are healthy, who don't have breast cancer, about 89 will test positive. A woman tests positive, what is the chance that she actually has the disease, breast cancer? Well, this time it's the same problem, but I've changed the way I described it. Now people think, well, 98 test positive in all, 9 of those have the disease. 9 divided by 98, about 9%, and now 87% of doctors get the correct answer. Even 10-year-olds get it right when you present it in this way. It's the difference between natural frequencies, say 10 out of 1,000, as opposed to single event probabilities. The probability that she has the disease is 1%, and it makes a big difference in the way people think. The logic is the same, people follow the laws of probability, but only if the information is presented to them in a way that is intuitively more obvious. So here's a better way to think about human rationality, that people use ecological rationality. Now this does not mean preserving endangered species or the rainforest, ecological in the sense of our natural environment. That is, people can reason about content that's relevant to their own lives, mixed with their knowledge of the subject. People are good statisticians if they get information in the same way that they encounter experiences as they live. That is, you have a certain large number of experiences. Some number of them go one way, some number go the other way. You have an intuitive sense of how much. People have more trouble with formal rationality. That is, using rules and formulas to reason. These are very powerful. If you know a mathematical formula, if you know a law of logic or probability, then you're a very powerful reasoner because you don't have to be familiar with the subject matter. You can just plug in the variables into the formula. But that's what ordinary people are not so good at. These you have to learn in school. You have to deploy them consciously. Well, I have taught courses in rationality. I told people I'm writing a book on rationality. The main question that people ask me is not, how does logic work? How does probability work? How can you explain the causation and correlation? No, the question that I get, people ask me is, okay, Mr. Professor, you're writing a book on rationality. You explain to me, if people can be rational, why does humanity seem to be losing its mind? Why do so many people believe in conspiracy theories and magic and paranormal phenomena and fake news? So in the book, I also tried to answer this question. It's a complicated question, and I think there are at least 4 parts of the answer. The first is a powerful fallacy called motivated reasoning. Remember when I defined rationality, I said rationality is always in service of a goal. Well, that goal is not necessarily objective truth. It could also be to win an argument in which the stakes matter to you. There is a saying from a famous American journalist, it is very hard to get a man to understand something when his job depends on not understanding it. The goal might be to show how wise and moral your group is, and how your religion, your tribe, your political party, and how stupid and evil the opposite one is. That's sometimes called my side bias. That is, you are in favor of any reasoning that leads to a conclusion that makes your own side look good. It means you increase in status in your community, your tribe. You avoid being ostracized. You're a hero with the people that you hang around with, whether you're right or wrong. So for example, in the United States, where there is a big divide between people on the left who believe that human activity is leading to climate change, people on the right who often deny it. Well, if you're on the right and you say, I believe in climate change, then your friends are going to abandon you. You will be alone. It's not necessarily so irrational for the local goal of being liked by your friends, your community, if you say something that is false, as long as everyone you know also holds that false belief. Let me give you an example of the my side bias. Here is a logical syllogism, and your task is to decide, is it a valid logical syllogism, which is to say, does the conclusion follow logically from the premises? If you believe the premises, do you have to believe the conclusion? Okay, and it's from I apologize, this is an American issue. It's one that divides people very sharply. It's very emotional. For the policy called affirmative action, that is, in hiring someone for a job, in admitting them to a competitive university, do you give them an advantage if they're a woman, if they're perhaps a racial minority, like being African American, in order to make up for past imbalances. So that's the issue. It's called affirmative action. Here's the syllogism. If college admissions are fair, then affirmative action laws are no longer necessary. College admissions are not fair, therefore affirmative action laws are necessary. So the challenge is not, is this conclusion true? The challenge is this syllogism valid? That is, if the first statement is true, the second statement is true, do you have to believe the third statement? The answer is no. This is the fallacy of denying the antecedent. If I have a statement, if P, then Q, and I say not P, you can't conclude not Q. That is a logical fallacy. When you give this question to samples of respondents, people on the left, liberals, they commit the fallacy. People on the right, conservatives, don't commit the fallacy. Now, if you ask for an explanation among the conservatives, the people on the right, they'll say, we told you all along, liberals are irrational. However, consider this syllogism. Also an American example, this is about capital punishment or executions. People on the right say you have to have capital punishment. I believe that you have it still in Thailand. People on the left, like people in Europe, say capital punishment is cruel, there should not be any capital punishment. So that's the political controversy. Here is the syllogism. If less severe punishments, like life in prison, deter people from committing crime, then capital punishment should not be used. Less severe punishments do not deter people from committing crime, therefore capital punishment should be used. So the question here is the same question. Does this conclusion follow, I'm sorry, this is the conclusion, follow from premise number one, premise number two. What happens here is now a majority of conservatives, people on the right, commit the fallacy. A majority of people on the left, liberals, don't commit the fallacy. So it's not true that liberals are rational and conservatives are irrational, or that liberals are irrational, conservatives are rational. It's that both sides are rational when the argument supports a position they believed all along, and they're irrational when the conclusion supports a position that they don't like. In both cases, people are exercising the my side bias, namely they think that all arguments, all evidence support their side and contradict the other side. A second part of the explanation, why do we see so much irrationality? That is, why does rationality seem scarce? Is that we all have intuitions, ways of thinking that are very deeply rooted in the human mind, probably installed by the process of biological evolution, that governs the way that people think. An example is dualism, the idea that every person has a body and a mind. And of course, when we talk to each other, when we have social relationships, we don't treat other people like they're a machine, just a piece of biology, just like meat. We assume that every person, together with their body, has an abstract mind, emotions and beliefs and perceptions. We can't see the other person's mind, but we all assume that other people have a mind. Well, as soon as you start thinking that way, it's a short step to think that there are minds without bodies. Now, a scientist would say the mind is just the activity of the brain. But our common sense, our folk intuition is that the mind can exist separately from the body, and then that makes it easy to believe in spirits, in souls, in ghosts, in an afterlife, in reincarnation, in ESP, extrasensory perception. That is knowing something even if you never saw it or heard about it. Another folk intuition, deeply rooted in the human mind, is sometimes called essentialism. that living things contain an invisible essence, a kind of some sort of stuff inside you that gives them their forms and powers. From there, it's a short step to assume that a disease must come from some adulteration of one's essence by some foreign contaminant. That says something got inside the body, a pollutant or a poison. That's why you're sick. From there, you can now kind of understand why many people resist vaccines, because your common sense, your intuition says, you're going to inject in my arm a form of the same germ that actually gives me smallpox or measles or COVID. That sounds very icky to me, even though our best science and medicine says, well, that will stimulate the immune system and make you healthier. People's common sense is, oh, that's the last thing you should do, is actually inject me with some foreign substance that gives people a disease, inject them with a germ. Or genetically modified organisms. They have repeatedly been shown to be perfectly safe, but people have a kind of ick reaction to them. They go, yuck, even though they're perfectly safe, because it feels like some foreign polluting substance has been added to your food. It makes people, on the other hand, welcome homeopathy, where some tiny little memory or reminder of the original substance is put in your body. People think that can actually make you healthy, and various herbal remedies that science says don't work, but people still like them. And it's also why in many, many cultures there are folk medicines that don't work, but people still do them, that seem to be pushing or squeezing the contaminant out of the body, like purging, making people vomit, bloodletting, cutting open a vein, letting the blood come out, fasting, and the general sense of getting rid of toxins. It's very appealing to people, even if medicine and science say they don't work. Finally, here's a third intuition, teleology. Our plans and artifacts are designed with a purpose. The reason that we do things, that we plan things, that we invent things is because we want something to happen. We have an idea beforehand. We have a purpose, an intent, a design. That's just the way we think about our own plans. Well, from there is a short step to think that the whole universe is designed with a purpose, and so people believe in creationism and astrology and synchronicity, the idea that there are no coincidences. Whenever it looks like a coincidence, it means that there is some actual reason behind it. The idea that everything happens for a reason. Again, science says a lot of random stuff happens. Not everything happens for a reason. There are coincidences, but the human mind does not like to think that way. Well, for people who are scientifically sophisticated, who read newspapers, go to university, read books, they manage to unlearn these primitive folk intuitions and accept objective truths. But the way they do it is really not by understanding it themselves, but by trusting legitimate expertise, like scientists, like historians, like journalists, like government officials who keep records. So even someone, I consider myself to be pretty scientifically sophisticated. I'm a professor, I teach at a university. But if you ask me, how does the COVID vaccine actually work? I wouldn't give you a very good explanation. I'd say, well, yeah, antibodies and immune system. But really what happens is I trust the people who've done the experiments, who gathered the statistics, and I say, they know what they're doing, I believe them. And in fact, if you give tests of science to people who hold the unscientific belief in creationism, that is the denial of Darwin's theory of evolution, the acceptance of the account in the Christian Bible, then you give them a test of science, it's not that they don't know science. They score the same in tests of science as people who do accept Darwin's theory of evolution. Likewise, there are people who deny that burning fossil fuels sends carbon into the atmosphere and causes global warming. It's not because they're ignorant of science. Those people, when you give them tests of scientific knowledge, they score the same as the people who do believe that carbon emissions are harming the planet. The only difference is politics. The farther you, in the United States, I don't know what the data are for Thailand, the farther you are to the political right, the more you deny evolution and climate change. The more you are to the political left, the more you accept evolution and climate change. Weird, irrational, unscientific beliefs persist in people who don't trust the establishment, who think that scientists are just one more political party. One more reason why people accept false beliefs, pseudoscience, fake news. If you ask me, why do people believe in these crazy ideas? Part of the answer is it depends on what you mean by the word believe. I think that people have two different kinds of beliefs. There's beliefs in the reality zone. That is the physical objects around you, the other people that you deal with face to face, your memory of how you interacted. For beliefs of that kind, people are pretty irrational. They think their beliefs are true or false. They think you can tell by looking, by testing them. And we have to be rational that way. That's the only way in which we can show up to work on time, keep petrol in the car and food in the refrigerator, and get our children clothed and fed and off to school on time. The laws of the universe are very unforgiving, and if you are illogical, if you disobey those laws, you're not going to function in life. However, there's another kind of belief. I call this the mythology zone. The distant past, the unknowable future, faraway peoples and places, remote corridors of power, what happens in the White House, what happens in 10 Downing Street, what happens in the Kremlin, the microscopic, the cosmic, the counterfactual, the metaphysical. Here, what you believe really doesn't matter to your own life. People hold these beliefs not because they're true or false, but because they're entertaining, they're uplifting, they're empowering, they're morally edifying. And people think whether they are true or false is unknowable, you can't find out, and kind of irrelevant to your day-to-day life. So people just believe what makes them feel good. Examples are religion, where we say that religious beliefs are held by faith, not by reason or evidence. National myths, the great heroes and martyrs and saints that founded our great nation, whatever the nation is. Historical fiction, stories set in the past where we don't really care whether the characters said those words, exact words or not. I don't know if in Thailand people watch the television program The Crown about Queen Elizabeth and her family. They didn't say any of those things, but people don't care. It's entertainment. And fake news, like Hillary Clinton had an affair with Yoko Ono, and conspiracy theories, like Bill Gates is injecting us with microchips and calling it a vaccine. Here, people treat them as good stories, just like what you would see in the movies. I'll give you an example. In the United States, before there was the conspiracy theory QAnon, there was a conspiracy theory called Pizzagate. This is that Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant. Now, this is completely crazy, but many people said they believed it. But what does it mean when they say they believe it? So a typical response is that someone who went to that restaurant left a 1-star review on Google Reviews, and he said the pizza was very, very bad, and there were suspicious-looking men who were looking at my 5-year-old son. Now, this is not the reaction you'd expect if you literally believed that children were being sexually abused in the basement. You'd call the police. And it makes you wonder, how deeply did he really believe it? So what does it mean when someone says, I believe Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring? What it really means is, I believe she's so evil, she's so depraved, that that's the kind of thing she could have done. And how do we know that she didn't? Or a better translation of, I believe Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring is, Hillary, boo. That's really what people are saying when they hold that belief. That is, beliefs can be expressions of moral convictions, not of factual accuracy, when it comes to the mythology zone. Now, for many of us, that seems crazy. It seems impossible. We might, especially if you have a scientific mindset, you think if you believe something, it's got to be true. That's not true of most of humanity. So when the great philosopher Bertrand Russell said, it is undesirable to believe a proposition when there is no ground whatsoever for supposing it is true. That might sound, obvious, of course, but no. For it is actually a radical, unnatural manifesto for most people, beliefs that don't affect their day-to-day existence. It doesn't matter whether they're true or false. They are moral proclamations, moral announcements. Well, it raises a question, how can we be more rational? Obvious question. Well, to begin with, I think that the tools of formal rationality, the normative models, should be second nature. They should be part of everyone's intuition. That in school, rationality, we have a saying in English that in school you learn the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, maybe rationality should be the 4th R. As in the following humorous headline from an American satire magazine called The Onion. CDC, Centers for Disease Control, announces plans to send every US household pamphlet on probabilistic thinking. Secondly, norms of rationality should be promoted. That is, we should, in our everyday conversation, in our newspaper editorials, in television commentary, in blogs, on websites, people should just be aware of what it is to be rational. People should be aware, I think, of fallacies like the availability bias, which I explained, the my side bias, arguing ad hominem, that is, instead of showing why the argument is false, you show why the person who believes it is bad or stupid. That is a fallacy called arguing ad hominem, at the person, instead, sometimes also called setting up a straw man, a weak version of the theory that you're arguing against so that you can knock it over. Well, everyone should know about these things and know that they are fallacies. The idea that you have to base your beliefs on evidence, you have to change your mind when the evidence changes, this should be seen as signs of strength, not weakness. There are many people who say you've got to hold on to your beliefs even when the evidence goes against them. That is crazy. You should change your mind when the evidence changes, because no one is perfect. No one is infallible, like the Pope claims to be. No one is omniscient, knows everything. And also, very importantly, institutions with their rationality promoting rules must be safeguarded. That is, these are organizations that we belong to that have rules of how you argue, how you propose ideas, in which one person can notice and make up for another person's biases. Because even though all of us, when we try to think, we all can be very irrational, but we're often very good at noticing how the other person is irrational. There we're pretty good. So these institutions, these rules, can make us collectively more rational than any of us is individually. Let me give you an example. This is also from the card selection task. Remember, if D, then 3? Well, when people work alone, as I mentioned, most people get the answer wrong. About 1 person out of 10 get it right, 10%. But let's say you put people in groups of, say, 4 people that all solve the problem together. Well, now 70% of the groups get it right. All it takes is for one person to notice the correct answer and explain it to everyone else, and everyone else agrees that it's the correct answer. That's the way institutions, if they are well designed, can work. What do I mean by rationality promoting institutions? Well, the obvious example is science. Science has the rule you have to test your theories empirically with data, with experiments. Science has peer review. You don't get to publish anything you want. Even if you have a Nobel Prize, if you try to publish a paper in a scientific journal, they send it out to other people who decide whether it gets published or not. In democratic government, we have checks and balances. Instead of having a king or a dictator or a czar or a Kaiser or an all wonderful leader, there is a parliament. There is a court system. In parliament, sometimes there is a legislature and a senate. There's constitution, so that no one person, no one body gets to dictate the only one to dictate policy. We know what happens when you have a government that does that. Disaster, because no one's perfect, no one's God, no one is infallible. If one person has all the power, then inevitably they will make mistakes. If no one can tell them you've made a mistake, then you can get disaster. Journalism. In a good newspaper that you trust, the writers don't write anything they want. They've got an editor, and the editor says, how do you know that's true? Which source did you interview? You have other people in the newspaper staff that look up whether the factual claims are true or not. In the court system, you've got adversarial proceedings. You've got a prosecutor, you've got a defense, you've got a jury, you've got a judge. It's not just one person who decides. In universities, there is the principle of freedom of inquiry, that in theory, a professor, a student, a researcher can try out any idea they want. It should not be illegal or against the rules to propose some idea. Maybe the idea is wrong, then someone else can show that it's wrong. Open debate. It's not like a religious doctrine where God says it's true, therefore I believe it's true. Anything you say in a university, someone else can say, well, I don't think it's true. You prove to me that it's true. I think maybe it's false. That's the way universities work. That's why we have not scientific knowledge. And even Wikipedia, which is surprisingly, it is quite accurate. It's not perfect, but it's as accurate as traditional encyclopedias. There, if you are a contributor to Wikipedia, anything you write can be corrected by someone else, and you all agree, when you are a Wikipedia writer, to follow rules for objectivity and neutrality and backing up what you write with sources in the published record. You can compare that with, say, Twitter or Facebook, which are not so accurate because anyone can say anything they want and no one else can correct it. Well, if we want our society to be more rational, we've got to strengthen these rationality-promoting institutions. Experts should be prepared to show their work. If a public health expert says everyone should wear a mask, well, they should say the reason why everyone should wear a mask is that we have done studies that show that if you wear a mask, you're less likely to transmit COVID. If all they're doing is saying, you wear a mask because I said you have to wear a mask, they should be prepared for people to dismiss them, to blow them off. Fallibility should be acknowledged. We start off in a state of ignorance because no one knows anything when they're born. It's not that God whispers the truth into your ear. Even experts don't know everything to begin with. They only know things by studying them, by realizing they might be wrong, someone else can show they're wrong. That should be acknowledged by experts so that when they do change their mind, as inevitably they must, then they won't sacrifice their credibility, but they'll say, that's the way science works. No one is 100% correct all the time. In science, you should be prepared to be wrong. Let the facts show you you're wrong. People should understand that. And gratuitous politicization should be avoided. If a journal, if a scientific society, if a university makes it seem as if they are just the same as the political left, then people who are on the political right will just ignore them. Finally, why rationality matters, which is the third part of the subtitle of my book. Well, rationality matters to our lives, and there are studies that show that people who follow normative models, that is, logic and probability and causation and correlation, the 7 models that I explained, and who avoid common fallacies like availability and base rate neglect and confirmation bias, on average, they get into fewer accidents and mishaps. They are better off financially in terms of their health, in terms of keeping a job, and they're less likely to be cheated or swindled by medical or psychic charlatans, by fakes who say, give me all your money, I'll sell you this rare cure, which doesn't work. If you are familiar with the normative models of rationality, you're less likely to be a victim of a criminal, of a cheater. Rationality also drives material progress. The book that I wrote before rationality was called Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress, in which I showed graphs that demonstrate that over the course of history, over centuries, over decades, many indicators of human well-being have improved. We live longer. We're more likely to be at peace. There's less poverty. People are safer. People have better lives than 100 years ago or 200 years ago. How did that happen? Well, people often ask me, it's a frequently asked question, oh, so you believe in progress. There's something that just makes people better and better as time passes. The answer is no, I don't believe that the universe contains any force that makes us better and better. In fact, the universe kind of tries to grind us down, if anything. The only reason that progress happens is that people use reason to try to improve human flourishing, to make people healthier and safer and better fed and more peaceful. That's the only reason that we have progress. And finally, I argue in another book, a book that I published 10 years ago called The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, where I showed that overall, compared to the past, there is less slavery and murder and rape and war and genocide. And I showed that many of those processes also began with a moral argument. Someone would give a reason why slavery was evil, or war was evil, or dictatorship, or the suppression of women, or racial minorities, or persecution of religions. Start off, they might be the only one who believes it, but then the argument would go viral. People would discuss it in coffee houses and bars and salons. It would influence politicians who would then eventually change the laws and customs. So even though today, if I asked you why is slavery wrong, you might think, what a crazy thing to ask. Of course it's wrong. 150 years ago, people did provide arguments as to why it was wrong, and those arguments won. And I ended my book, Rationality, by showing how over history, very often it was reason, it was logic, it was rationality that led people to abolish harmful practices like war and slavery and other forms of injustice. Well, I think I've spoken long enough. I think now I will stop, having made the case for what rationality is, why how people can be rational, how they're sometimes irrational, why we seem to be observing so much irrationality in the world, and why it's important that we be more rational. From here, I will, again, thank you for the invitation, and I will be happy to accept your questions. Thank you very much.
If you have questions, please notify that we have a microphone we can get to you so you can ask a question, and Dr. Pinker will handle the audience himself. If you have a question, just notify and we can get you a microphone.
With a microphone here and a microphone here. That's so everyone can hear the question.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for Kasaetsart University to invite Professor Pinker to be with us today. I'm from Naresuan University, lower north of Thailand, Napisa. Actually, I'm a great fan of you. And the book that I really love, that really admired me, is the How the Mind Works. That's really amazing. My question to you is, in your theory and your idea, rationality depends on cultural settings, or it's just universal?
Well, I think we do have a core of rationality that is universal. And I began my book, Rationality, with a description of the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. These are some of the world's last hunter-gatherers. More than 10,000 years ago, everyone was a hunter-gatherer. That's how we evolved. There was no farming, there were no cities, there was no money, there was no machines. The only way people survived is they hunted animals and they gathered plants, nuts and roots. And what makes humans so unusual as a species, everywhere and since we differentiated from chimpanzees, is that humans use rationality. That's why humans can survive in deserts, in the Arctic, in rainforests, no matter what the climate, no matter what the ecosystem is, people figure out how to trap and hunt animals, how to extract food and medicine from plants. So this seems to be universal, and I give examples of how just amazingly the Bushmen, the Kung, the San of the Kalahari Desert, they can look at some tracks on the ground. They say, oh, that was a kudu. He was here 20 minutes ago. It was a male. It was an old male. He was getting tired. If we pursue it over that hill, we'll find it, and we can keep chasing it until it collapses. And then when it disappears, they'll look at the tracks, and they say, well, he probably went that way. That's where we'll try to surprise it. Many kinds of reasoning like that, or developing traps where there might be a lure of a bone that an animal likes to eat that's connected to a bent branch. And when the animal eats the bone, then the branch snaps up and strangles the animal. You have to be very, very rational to engage in that, and all human cultures do that. Now, not all human cultures have discovered DNA and evolution and the Big Bang. That is a very specialized accomplishment, or logic, or probability, or mathematics. But that intuitive reasoning, how does the world work? What are the laws? What's right, what's wrong? That, I think, is universal, but it, of course, has to be developed. And then the most powerful kind of reasoning, the one that has developed in modern societies, is the formal rationality. That is, formulas with symbols, mathematical symbols, logical symbols, computer programs that can be applied to anything, not just antelopes or nuts or birds. That has to be acquired, and that's why we have universities, because that kind of rationality we're not born with. It's not universal. We have schools, we have universities, we have scientific societies, we have newspapers.
And perhaps, if I can, I have another question. Does hope have a place in your theory?
Does hope?
Yeah, have a place in your theory.
I think depends. If it's hope, just let's pray and good things happen, then no. If it's hope in the sense of let's do what we can to make good things happen, let's not give up, let's not say we're doomed, let's make the discoveries, let's make the policies that will make things better. If we try that, more discoveries, more policy changes, more changes in behavior, then good things will happen. That's the kind of hope we do have to have. Thank you. Yes, there's a question on the other side. Microphone.
Thank you very much, Professor. Excuse my laryngitis voice. It's very your talk, but I have a question. Do you think rationality applies to certain topics? Meaning, some people seem to be very rational, but when it comes to the area of beliefs and religions, it seems like those areas of topic override or rather makes rationality shuts down. Thank you.
Yes, well, many people, in fact, I have a chapter in the book called Rationality and Irrationality. Why are many people, all of us, no one's perfectly rational, no one is Mr. Spock. Why are people sometimes irrational? Are there cases where where emotion or intuition are better than rationality? Well, there's some cases where they're not in opposition. It's not either or. So, and that actually relates to my definition of rationality, as rationality is always in pursuit of some goal. Now, rationality can't tell you what that goal is. And there are many goals, people think of them as irrational. They're not irrational. They're just separate from rationality. Enjoying beauty, loving your children and your family, and enjoying friendship, enjoying nature. They're not rational or irrational, but there are rational ways in which you can enjoy more of them. If you don't want to fight with your husband or wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or children or parents, there are certain ways you can think. If you don't want to get sick, if you want to be able to appreciate nature, it's rational not to destroy nature. Given the goal, whether it's rational or irrational, there are rational ways of pursuing the goal. Sometimes in an argument, the more irrational person can win just because they can't be persuaded by arguments, and so irrationality can be a kind of bargaining tactic. The problem with it as a bargaining tactic is if someone is always irrational and they win an argument just because they're stubborn and they won't listen to an argument, you can abandon them and be friends or be a romantic partner with someone who is more rational. So it's a risky strategy to be irrational. Then there are cases where all of us have to make a trade-off between something that we enjoy now that will make us worse off in the long run, or we wait, we deprive ourselves now because there'll be a greater reward in the future. Such as, do you eat a lot because it tastes good now, but your health will be worse, you'll get fat later? Do you set aside money for retirement so that when you're old you won't be poor, or do you just spend it all now? Do you blow your top and get angry at someone if they say something that annoys you, even though you might damage the friendship over the long run or the marriage? So we always have these trade-offs. The answer is not we should always defer now for enjoyment in the future. Depends on how much. It would be crazy never to have any fun, never to travel, never to buy yourself something so that you could have a lot of fun when you're 85 years old, because you may not make it to 85 and you've got all those years. So it's always a balance, and all of these issues of when are we rational, when are we irrational, like those I try to explain in the very early on in the book.
Okay. From your books about the rational, and if the people are irrational, and what is your opinion about using the machine to help being rational in the decisions of everything, the machine learning and AI things? What is your opinion about that?
Yes, well, we already do that. The question is, given that people have limitations in their rationality, should they depend on artificial rationality, computers, formulas, to make them more rational, and will we see more of that with the development of artificial intelligence? Well, we already do that whenever, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with that, someone asks you a question, what's the first thing you do? You pull out your phone, you look up in Google Maps, you look up in Wikipedia, you do a search, and more and more artificial intelligence has been applied to just everyday decision making. That will increase a lot when, as artificial intelligence becomes more powerful, as long as we are rational about whether to trust the artificial rationality we've invented. Our rationality is imperfect. There's no such thing as 100% rationality. Our artificial intelligence is imperfect. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence that's 100% rational. So we always have to think, should I trust this algorithm? Should I trust this formula? And as long as we do that, I think that we can collectively become more rational if we rely on artificial intelligence that has been checked for its own rationality.
Okay, following his question, I would like to know your opinion about the law of the body on rationality.
The influence of the body?
Yeah.
By that, do you mean like if your heart is pounding, or if you feel flutters, or if you sweat? Or do you mean the activity of the brain?
No, I mean the body, a physical body, like a concept of conceptual metaphor, right? To use the body to make a rational.
Oh, do you mean like the use of metaphor and analogy? That is, when we talk about abstract things in terms of physical analogs. So we say inflation is rising as if it was like a balloon, or that he destroyed the argument as if it was like fighting a war. Or, yeah, so I discussed that in another book. I wrote a book called The Stuff of Thought, Language as a Window into Human Nature. And a lot of our language, well, certainly in English, haven't studied this in the Thai language, but I bet it's true in Thai as well. If you look at how people talk about abstract things, like variables that change, like abstract forces, then a lot of the words originally were taken from physical interactions, from holding things and breaking things and destroying things or putting things together, from walking from one place to another, from pushing against a resistance. For example, when we talk about arguing, we talk about it almost as if it's like a war. Like, he attacked my argument and I defended it, but then I destroyed his case. Almost as if people are actually fighting with guns, but all they're doing is exchanging words, but we talk about it very concretely. Or we say, John's health went from sick to well, as if it actually, there's a place here that's sick, there's a place here that's well, and then John walked over. Now, of course, John may have been in bed the whole time, but we talk about it as if it's motion. That's very widespread. Again, I don't know about Thai, but I'd be willing to bet it's true. And I think it's a consequence of the fact that the reasoning, the rationality that we evolved with, that biology gave us, is about solving physical problems. The reason that we as a species can do science and philosophy and religion and mathematics and law is that we take our concrete intuitions and we manage to turn them into abstract formulas. Instead of something literally rising in the air, we think about a variable like the inflation rate rising. So we can apply the modes of thinking that evolved to deal with the physical world to abstract realms. And that's what makes humans smart. As long as you don't get too carried away, if you don't remember, these are just metaphors that, for example, things that fall according to Newton's laws, according to the law, they accelerate according to the more they fall, the faster they fall. That's not true of inflation. So if you think too concretely, if you think too much with your body or with physical bodies, you'll make errors. But still, that's where our ability to reason abstractly came from to begin with.
Professor Pinker, at the beginning of your talk, you have mentioned that rationality is something expected out of educated persons. Are you suggesting?
Well, abstract rationality. I think even people who are uneducated are rational when it comes to their own lives, unless they're mentally ill, unless they're schizophrenic. But ordinary people are rational when it comes to their day-to-day physical lives.
Then my next question is there any drawback if everyone is rational?
If everyone was rational, would there be any drawbacks? I don't think there would be, as long as the goals that they attain are goals that lead to the benefit of humanity. Now, if people were all rational about developing better bioweapons or better propaganda or things that were better to try to convince more and more people to do fake cures or believe fake news, that would not be so helpful. But as long as the rationality is deployed toward health and life and safety and truth, then the more the better. And I think you could even jump up one level and make a meta-argument over why, even though goals themselves aren't dictated by being rational, you can then say, well, are there rational choices of which goals we should pursue? And I think the answer there, and I talk about this in my book, Rationality, is yes. That is, everyone trying to lie as cleverly as possible, that makes everyone worse off, including yourself. If everyone is violent, well, I get the advantage, I get to steal someone's good stuff, but they get to steal my good stuff, and we're all worse off. Even with goals, I think ultimately you can make rational arguments about what are the best goals, where the ultimate final goal is you want to be alive. That's the goal that biology builds into us. Yes, we have another question over there.
Thank you for your great speech, and I just want a little suggestion for my student, because now I teach students in high school, and then I think it's have a lot of things that's quite challenging for my student in rational, because it's have like they have a generation gaps, and it's have a lot of things that different in the culture of the country and the studying. And then it's have a lot of things that's quite challenging for the classroom, that we have to arrangement to the student, that we have to use like it have a lot of curriculum that we have to follow, but it's hardly to enhance the rationality to our class. How we choose at it to make them know and understand the rationality, and we can change their mindset to be more and understanding about it. Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood the question. I'm sorry. What is the question exactly? Maybe actually, if you could, it's hard for me to hear through the mask too. Okay. I don't know if you could just take it off just for. Yeah.
It's about how to develop students to think in rationality in that classroom.
Yes.
For high school students.
Well, it's a good. That is okay. Yes, I understand now. And that is a good question, because even though I think it's a good idea to have courses in rationality or critical thinking, as it's sometimes called, logic and probability and rational argument. That is, you avoid the ad hominem fallacy of attacking the person instead of the idea. Still, it can't just be one course, because when we all know, many of us who are professors, many of us who are students, you take a course, you read the textbook, you take the exam, you leave the course, then you forget everything. And that's not good enough for rationality. So it can't just be one course. As you suggest, it's got to be throughout the curriculum. Every course should emphasize rationality. If it's literature, if it's history, if it's art, if it's sociology, and of course if it's science and technology or law or philosophy, you should not make errors of reasoning. You should not attack the person instead of the argument. You should not judge an argument based on how powerful or prestigious the person is, but rather whether the argument has evidence behind it, if it has reason behind it. These should be habits of thinking that should be part of our culture and should be developed everywhere. Now, universities have a special responsibility to teach it, and individual courses on logic, on probability, on critical thinking are good, but they should be norms or habits or values that we try to respect everywhere. Yes.
Okay. The other side of rationality, I think it's about like feeling, emotion, or gut feeling, something like this. I would like to mention, like from the movie I, Robot, right? That the main character was saved by the robot instead of he wished that the robot could have saved the child, right? But the robot did that out of the rationality. So I would like to ask your opinion on this. Thank you.
Yes, so feelings are the source of many of the goals that rationality is used to attain. Remember, the definition of rationality always depends on a goal, and the goal itself is not part of rationality. Many of those goals come from feelings. You love your children, you love your romantic partner, you feel empathy, you respect nature. And although ultimately I think even those you could have rational arguments about them, but at the end of the day, at the bottom of your heart, there's some things that you just feel. And as long as they don't interfere with someone else's ability to pursue goals, to enjoy something, there's nothing irrational about respecting those feelings. In the case of I, Robot, from Isaac Asimov, of course he had the 3 rules of robotics. And the first one is a robot must never harm a human or let a human come to harm. Is that rational or irrational? It doesn't matter. It's built into the robot. It's the robot's feelings, and it deploys all of its intelligence to be consistent with that rule. You could call it even that feeling. On the other hand, if it's a feeling that doesn't pertain to your choice of goals, but how you attain goals, like vaccines give me the creeps, I think I'm going to take an herbal remedy instead so that I don't get COVID. That's not a feeling that you should indulge, because the ultimate feeling you want is to be alive and to be healthy and to not harm others. To pursue that goal, just the feeling that I don't like vaccines cannot be defended, because it contradicts the goal of being healthy and being properly respectful of others' health.
Not a SUNY University. Okay, I have a question for Dr. Pinker. Yeah, to what extent would you say that divisive groups can manipulate rationality for their own divisive purposes? For example, the Nazis, the Khmer Rouge, groups that want to ultimately destroy society. To what extent might they try to manipulate rationality?
Well, they do, and again, rationality is always in pursuit of a goal, and in those cases they were evil and destructive goals. They're goals that could not have been maintained if they were in open debate and dialogue with their critics, which is why destructive authoritarian political movements always suppress dissent, disagreement. They jail people or they kill people who disagree with them. I think there's a reason for that. Namely, if they allowed themselves to be criticized, it would show that they are wrong. That's why freedom of speech is such an important value. But without it, if you lock onto a goal and the goal itself is not being debated, if you don't have to defend it against critics, then rationality can indeed be used to pursue that goal, and the result can be great destruction and suffering. Now, I think ultimately, it may, I don't want to say that good triumphs over evil always, it doesn't, but it's perhaps not a coincidence that the Nazis lost World War II and the Khmer Rouge were forced from power, and right now Putin is failing to attain his goals in Ukraine. And I don't think it's because God makes sure that good things happen. He sure doesn't. A lot of bad things happen. But if you have policies that make you less rational, in the case of Nazi Germany, they killed or expelled the Jews, including all the scientists who then worked for the Allies and helped the Allies win. If Putin doesn't listen to critics, puts them in jail, then anyone who's going to say your military stinks, no one could tell him that, because then they would be put in prison. Well, he's going to be using a military that stinks. So I think in the long run, it may not be a coincidence that on average, more rational civilizations tend to do better just because they are more likely to respect reality, and reality doesn't care how powerful you are, reality pushes back. But certainly over more local timescales, if you're insulated from criticism, you could apply rationality to do terrible things, to rationally pursue terrible goals. Yeah.
It doesn't, it wants me to speak. Thank you for such a wonderful talk. My question is, as a fellow lecturer, where do you think we should keep the balance between making a rational choice and just decide to trust your gut feeling? Because there are times when failing someone is the more rational choice, because they are going to retake the course and they're going to get better at what they are learning. But sometimes you feel like if you let this person pass the course, that person is going to, do better things in life with the choice that you make. So.
Yes. Well, very often in rational choice, that was one of the 7 normative models that I introduced. You're never, in real life, you're very rarely guaranteed a particular outcome. There's almost always probabilities. And often the total expected utility, the total payoff, is the sum of many different things, outcomes of a decision, all of which have a probability attached to them. And so there's never just, or rarely, just one thing that you want to maximize, but other things that may pull in a different direction. So if you make one choice, you might have a lot of A and less of B. Another choice, you have a lot of B and less of A. And often it depends on how much you care about A compared to B. What are the chances that A will happen compared to B if you make one decision or another? And how much of more A or less A, more B or less B, each one of those two choices gives you. So that's what makes decision making very often so difficult. We don't have those numbers because it's not as if scientists have done enough studies to tell us how everything will turn out in life and what the probabilities are. When we talk about trusting our feelings, our intuition in cases like that, I think what it refers to is you don't do the calculations of expected utility. You can't. You don't have the data. You don't have the information. And so your lifetime of experience kind of contributes to an analog feeling of how much one option is preferable to another. And that's often the best that we can do, simply because we don't have a perfect information. It's sometimes called bounded rationality. That is, rationality that has to take into account the fact that you can never have perfect rationality because you never have infinite time, you never have infinitely precise data. And so you've got to make some guess, some cutoff. Sometimes it's called to satisfice. That's not a real English word, but it's a combination of satisfy, suffice. That is, you make some guess that is good enough, even though it's not perfect. And we're humans, we have no choice but to often do that. And the example that you gave is a perfect illustration. Thank you for your question.
Good morning. Okay. I'm from...
It works better without the mask.
Oh, okay. Hello. Okay. Sorry. Okay. When I tap, right? From Chulalongkorn University, and thank you so much for your talk. I'm a decision neuroscientist by training. So, as I understand, when you define rationality as like actions or something to pursue a goal, I see it as like problem solving skills, because you pursue a goal by some skill sets and overcome some difficulties or obstacles, and that's kind of how I phrase this, it's like there are actions following those rationality. In contrast to when you like decide to believe something, for this part there is no actions out of that. So yes. My first question is that, would you like draw distinctions between the two cases? Because for sometimes people decide to believe something just to entertain themselves. Like there's no action of that, maybe just like you fancy some thought and you feel good about it. And the second question is that with some beliefs, they gain something. Like as you just say that some people like fits better to their social relationships, to their tribes, like strengthen their groups, maybe to gain more revenue, maybe to win the next election. So would you think this is like more rational or irrational, or there can be like conflicts between different models?
Yeah, so the first, the distinction you raised between using reason to solve a problem in the physical world, to bring something about, is sometimes called practical reason. And the contrast is, in pure reason, you are deploying logic or probability or other modes of thinking in order just to appreciate something that's true, to think true thoughts. Sometimes called pure reason versus practical reason, or what is true versus what to do. Now, I collapse them in that definition on the assumption that having true beliefs can itself be a goal, even if you aren't solving some physical problem. So that's why I didn't differentiate pure reason and practical reason. I think both of them, the reason that I think both of them are in pursuit of a goal is that even in pure reason, you never apply logic just to think things that are true. There are always things that are true and important. Because I could always say that, I mean, just following the laws of logic, if Bangkok is the capital of Thailand, it's also true that either Bangkok is the capital of Thailand or the moon is made of cheese. Either Bangkok is the capital of Thailand or 2 and 2 equals 5. There's an infinite number of things that you can say that are logically true, but perfectly useless. That is, it's true, but it doesn't get you anything, it doesn't give you any insight, there's no reason that you should think that thought, as opposed to the trillions, in fact, the infinite number of true thoughts that you can generate using pure logic. So even in the case of pure reason, I think there's always some goal of truths that are potentially useful, that are relevant, that are powerful in developing other truths. The other question is, are there cases in which the goal that people pursue is, with their beliefs, is being accepted in their group, showing that their group is more moral or correct or reasonable than the enemy group, that is the other political party, the other religion, the other tribe. And yes, that is, I think, one of the big threats to greater rationality, is that people pursue rationality toward the goal of being more socially accepted, making their group look better, at the expense of a truth that makes the whole country or the whole world be better off. In fact, I think that itself is one of the dilemmas that game theory helps to illuminate. Game theory just shows in many cases everyone doing what's good for them makes them worse off than if everyone followed some rule. And carbon emissions would be an example. But that's also true of arguing and truth. There are many cases where I say something and all of my friends and the people I hang out with have more respect for me. That's true of someone I disagree with. Their group makes them a hero for saying the opposite. And if it's an issue where we have to make a decision as a society, then we're worse off if we simply apply our rationality to be popular within our group. We ultimately want all of our rationality to be directed toward the goal of how does the world work, what's true, what's false, how do we get what we want. And I think a built-in reason that we're often so irrational is this game theory tragedy that what is rational for every individual within their social circle, within their clique, within their club, within their tribe, within their party, that makes the whole society worse off.
Thank you.
I'll just take an opportunity that the microphone is just next to me. A very nice talk. Your talk reminded me of, first of all, Chaipat from Chulalongkorn University. Beautiful talk.
Thank you.
Your talk reminded me of a book from Brian Christian. One is The Alignment Problem. Have you heard of that? They
Yes.
talk about the, setting the right goal for artificial intelligence. And one of the challenge is that sometimes, also rationality is about, as you said, using the knowledge to achieve the goal. But they said sometimes we don't actually know what our goal is. So in that case, how would we achieve the goal without knowing actually what our goal is? And the next question is about, also from Brian Christian, the previous book called The Most Human Human. We talk if it's a paramount of the human. I couldn't agree more, but do you also talk about other rationality that's also important for human?
Yes. So it is true that sometimes people are unclear of their goals and that much wisdom comes from actually specifying your goals. Often when we see someone do something stupid, we say, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you think that will win you? And getting people to make fewer foolish decisions about their own lives depends on them thinking, well, this is really what matters to me in the long run. I really want to have, to be respected, I want to be stable, I want to, my children, my spouse, my friends to respect me. And once you're clear on your goals, then you can do things in your day-to-day life that are more likely to bring them about. With, of course, the problem is that often we have multiple goals, and sometimes they're even in conflict, as I mentioned in answering a previous question. Likewise, we have to decide when we have an artificial technology what the goals are that we design in the system, and often those are multiple and somewhat competing. And the more explicit we are of what we want our tools to accomplish, probably the more humane our technologies will be.
Professor, we can do one more question, yeah?
Okay, yes?
Let me introduce myself.
No luck? Do we have another microphone?
I think the battery is coming low on the microphones. If you want to come use my microphone, if you can come use my microphone, you're welcome to do that. I'm plugged in. Those are on battery and they're running low.
Hello, test.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
The battery's getting low.
Yes, yeah. Thank you very much. Let me introduce myself. My name is Suchada Thongmalai. I'm from Department of Philosophy and Religions, Humanities, faculties from here, Kasaetsart University. As my interest research area is about meditation and inner peace, the ways that we practice is we practice our mind to be on state that have no thought. And since I have listened to your fantastic sharings, I feel like I really interested in study more about rationals. I'm looking for something that connect together. So my question is, how can we use the knowledge between the inner peace and the rational together to make a peaceful societies or the peaceful world?
Probably the most direct connection, and I'm by no means an expert on meditation, but the awareness, the ability to transcend yourself, the ability to look down on yourself as opposed to just experiencing things from inside, the ability to set aside your own prejudices, your own feelings, and just say, well, what is the universal view? What is the disembodied view? What is the view that doesn't depend on just on me? To the extent that meditation allows you to do that, instead of being locked in your skin, you take the bigger view. That is a requirement for greater rationality, especially in a society where different people have different interests, they have competing goals, they have competing values. The reason that we make any progress is we think about what is justifiable, what is defensible, what is beneficial for all of humanity, all living things. And it's very difficult to get to that state because each of us is locked inside us. We wake up, we think about what's good for me, what does the world look like to me, what do I think is reasonable, what is my reputation based on, what will make people admire me, how will I win the argument. And a lot of rationality it's not about me, it's about the universe, it's about reality, it's about mathematical and logical laws that are the same for everyone. And if meditation can, or any practice, can get us out of our self-contained, biased habits, then it will lead probably to better outcomes both for the person and certainly for all of humanity.
Well, thank you so very much. I want to thank the audience for their very, very thoughtful questions, and I want to thank the professor, obviously, for his very insightful answers. So please join me one last time, or one additional time, not last time, one additional time in thanking Professor Pinker for his time with us this morning.
Thank you. you. Thank you.
Professor, I'm going to ask you please to bear with us. We have a few more short ceremonial things. And first is we'd like to present you with a gift on behalf of the university in recognition for your contribution to the proceeding today. Thank you very much. And if you can wait with us, please. Then we'd also need to do one more short group photo with the people that have the magic 80 badge. There's a little 80 badge. Some people have been given a magic badge, the little sticker. We're asking you to please join on the podium, on stage, for another group photo. It will be a larger group. If you have a magic 80 button, the little sticker that says 80 on it, like that one, yes. We're asked to go to this podium stage, please. Well, okay, for those of you who are looking for lunch, lunch is outside at the tents, unless you have the magic sticker. Magic sticker, lunch is upstairs. But for those of you otherwise, the lunch is available outside in the tents. Then the last group is the four presenters from this afternoon. Please join Dr. Pinker, the four speakers from this afternoon. Academics who discuss their research with us in topics that are related to the presentation this morning on rationality. Our first presenter is Associate Professor Dr. Teptawi Chokwasin from the Faculty of Humanities here at Kasaetsart University. The presentation is entitled Rationality, Pain, Kantian Embodied Practices, and the Invisible Quan. Dr. Teptawi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teptawi Chokwasin, who is going to present the topic of rationality, pain, Kantian embodied practices, and the invisible quan. Okay. What inspired me into talking about this topic and researching about this topic, it would be from my childhood experience. I was taught to believe by my parents, to believe in something invisible, but I would feel that those things, those invisible things are very sacred. It is called something like ghosts, spiritual entities, things like that. And this one is called quan. The concept of quan here, many Thais would be familiar with the concept of the thing which is called quan, or in plural form quans. They are invisible entities. The beliefs of the people of Southeast Asia indicate their existence. Quans are located in various parts of the human body, such as human head, arms, legs, things like that. And it is believed that they are rather invisible. However, they are having a sort of their own existence, such as the quan for the head would be with its own existence, not our head, or not our own soul, or own mind, things like that. However, they are not human souls and invisible spirits. This is study from one of the very well-known historian in Thailand, whose name is Suchit Wongthet. From my childhood experience, when I was taught to believe in quan, I have such a question like this. If I were hit on my head, the quan of my head would flee away, things like this. Would flee away and out of to somewhere else. It would be for me to get into some sort of a ceremony to bring it back. Maybe to get into the ceremony which is under the name of Bai Si, something like that, for me to get the belief that the quan would be already brought back to me. However, when I was hit by this kind of question like this, if I were hit on my head and I would be painful. I would have the very reason for me to say to myself that I would be painful. And it would be me myself who would be the very author of that kind of belief that I would be painful. How could the invisible entity of Kwan on my head, how could I know that it is now flayed away and it is not with me now? How should I know about this? I think maybe I was born in some rather modern time for me to cast away those sorts of beliefs. And I would ask things like this. If I would be already rational for me to have the reason to say that I would be the very author of that belief that I was painful when I was hit in the head. But if the human body spirit of Kwan truly exists, what is the relationship with the human capacity of rationality? This is the question I keep asking about. And it finally would be the very title for me to get my research into. If the human body spirit or Kwan truly exists, what is the relationship with the human capacity of rationality? Because it's just only me, myself, who would truly say to myself that I would be painful after being hit. Not that something would flee away out of my head, thing like that, okay? So the research objectives for me to get into this sort of philosophical reflections and philosophical research with the methodology of kind of interpretation, sort of things like that. It is for me to get the objectives like this, to study the concept of embodied practice and rationality from the philosopher Immanuel Kant, and the thing is called Kantian philosophical anthropology with a special emphasis on bodily pain. Because when I grow up and when I get to the study of philosophy, I read Immanuel Kant's book talking about the rationality and reason. The very same thing that Professor Pinker did give us in the morning. About reason and rationality, Immanuel Kant would reject the sort of teaching from Plato or Aristotle with the teaching like reason and rationality would be rather the sort of mental things alone. So reason and rationality would be the capacity just only for human beings, not those sort of other living beings, or sort of inanimism. But Kant would reject Plato and Aristotle. Kant would say that no, reason and rationality is not to be connected with the sort of invisible entities alone. You would talk about your soul, the sort of wisdom or intellect, which is the terminology from Plato and Aristotle, and you would convince us to get to think of rationality like something invisible, like something sort of relevant just only with the intellect, which is invisible. But Kant would say no, because Kant would say something instead. Rationality should be embodied, the sort of thing which is called embodied rationality. And this is the sort of thing that Kant would describe to us reader, that for us to be human beings like this, we are to have body and mind, the sort of bodily competence and mental competence. For us to move like this, sort of a bodily competence, and for us to think and to feel, it would be the sort of a mental capacity, okay? And when the question of things like this, can human rationality be conceptualized without the body and only within the realm of invisible spirit? When Plato would answer this question like yes, but Kant would say no. No, not just only in the realm of invisible spirit. Kant would say something like, we cannot do the things of rationalization if we would think of the sort of invisible spirit or invisible soul, or sort of an invisible intellect. Just only that. Because when we are to rationalize things, we are to estimate about those things, shape, those things, quantity, relation, things like that. So the terminology of quantity, qualities, relations, it would be, it cannot be conceptualized and unimaginable without bodily things. Okay. So for Immanuel Kant, for us to be rational, we must have body and the mental capacity. So for Kant, it is research by Swarbrick that the rationality can be conceptualized in the way of pragmatic theory of embodied rationality. From the research in the time of the beginning, maybe, of the 21st century, from Cohen and Ferguson, say something like that too. For one to be motivated to avoid from painful things, avoid from danger, it is the very capacity for that one to be rational. Such as I would be rational to say that I would avoid, refrain from the fire, refrain from the acid, things like this. So I would be rational to do those things. Because what? Because of what? Because I was motivated by something for me to avoid of those dangers. So for one to avoid painful experience, it's good for one's own living. It is even rational to avoid them than to, and irrational to embrace them, those dangers. However, there is still a question why. Why the sort of avoiding of danger would be rational like that, and to embrace them would be irrational. What is the very criterion for us to do things like this? Cohen and Ferguson explained with the sort of philosophical camp of internalism. Sort of that when we would think of we are rational about something, it means like Professor Finger said from the morning session, that we are to do P for us to reach Q, or we are to do some action to pursue some goals, things like that. So for us to be motivated to do P, for us to attain Q like that, it is somewhat the sort of an internal connection between pain and motivation. Because we were told to our own selves that, oh, when I would be burned by the fire, that is my pain, not someone else's pain, things like this. So I would be motivated to cure it, to get to the hospital maybe, and that is the very thing which is called rational action for me to do things like that. So Cohen and Ferguson would choose the very way of internalism in philosophy to explain the connection. So for me to get the conception of rationality and motivation and pain, now I would, with the other concept of embodied rationality. So I would think back to the sort of thing which is called Kwan in the old Thai belief and old Southeast Asian beliefs. For me to get this sort of analysis, the first analysis would be like this. Beliefs about the world viewed as being rational or irrational, maybe solely due to the fact that it is normative from different linguistic perspectives, rather than saying that only one nation using its own language can attain the exact knowledge and the truth about this world more than the people of another race. It means that maybe if we would think of the very word to know, to rationalize, or rationality, or being rational in English, in the English words like that, maybe we would think of those meanings from the English world perspective. But from Stitch and Mitsumoto 2018 research work, they would say that those words in another language would mean something else too. In Thai, we call to know by the very word ru, or rationalization, rationality, in the other word of ความมีเหตุผล thing like this. In Stitch and Mizumoto, we talk about the word in the Laotian language too. To know in Laotian language, it is who, things like this, in their works. And they, from their research work, from their analysis, they would say that one language could lead those people in that language to contain sort of a conceptualization of that language with the very phenomenon of knowing, of rationalizing. So from this analysis, I would think of maybe it could be that Kwan, the very word of knowing, sort of perceiving in Thai words or in Southeast Asian culture would be different from the Western world. So could it be true? This is my question. Could it be true that human rationality has been theorized and conceptualized in every part of the world since the dawn of human species? And I think it could be. Could it be that a belief in Kwan in the Southeast Asian countries is some kind of a trace of the ancient conceptualization of rationality? I think it could be. However, for everyone to talk about Kwan and for everyone to talk about the other realm of being rational, being scientifically rational, I think like this, Kwan is something superstitious, not scientific. So it is a very challenge for me to get these sort of two different realms, two totally different realms, to get into the same research work like this. And it would be sort of my challenge too. Which I believe that it could reach some sort of a successful point if I would receive many comments from today's meeting. It is believed that Kwan stationing at a part of the body will flee away that part of the body when that body is hurt. Such as Kwan or the top of head, which is called in Thai Jom Kwan, is fleeing away when hit very hard on one's head like that. It will flee away. The top body spirit or Jom Kwan stationing at the head, if severely injured, can lead to death. Things like this. This is again from Suchit Wongthep's research work. And the Jom Kwan here, the picture of this baby, it is called with this sort of a concrete meaning of the Kwan in Thai, it is called the hair world, like this. Yes, if the hair were or the total head of this baby, if it were hit, maybe it would lead to the baby's death, maybe. However, what does it mean for one to get this sort of belief, to get in relevance with the beliefs of Kwan? My analysis would be like this, from the sort of preliminary interpretation that it is in the progress of my research work. Rationality in the Southeast Asian ancient belief is somewhat relevant with the explanation by Kwan. If you were hit in the head, it is to get you into some sort of a malfunctioning of your head. Maybe you would feel dizzy, or it would lead to sort of a painful injury, things like that. Rationality is in connection with the normal functionalities of the parts of the human body. And this is my own analysis. Maybe rationality would be in some sort of a bodily framework when we think about the very word of rationality. For example, it is rational to accept that the eyes are to see, they are not to walk. So when someone would say that, oh, I believe that my eyes can be grabbed out of its place, and I would use them to walk instead of my legs, we would say, okay, that that belief of yours is rather irrational. Why? Because the eyes are to see, not to walk. It means the source of for one to say some sort of rational things in any realm of human affairs, it can be into this sort of framework of normal functionality of a human body, not to let it be hurt or malfunctioned, maybe. Such as why your sort of a process of this work, sort of a plan of this work, or the policy would be rational for us to accept, because it would lead to sort of a good ways, and it would not be malfunction. It would get into some sort of a normal functionality for this process, for this policy to go to process things like this. So this is the theoretical framework developed from my research work to get to the understanding of why rationality can be like this in the other realms of human affairs. Maybe it would stem out of our own body, because for me to reach my hand out like this, it is rational for me to say that it is my hand, and it is now in function for me to reach it out like this. But it is broken. It is irrational to say that I can reach my hand out like this, because it is now already broken. From this sort of a scheme of thinking, maybe I think it would lead to the meaning of rationality with some sort of in relevance with normal functionality of human body. So I could say that maybe the very word Kwan would be the words from that kind of belief. Okay, and that's the end of my presentation. And I would be very glad to receive any comments.
Thank you very much. Do you have time for a couple questions? Any questions? Yes.
Oh wait, it wasn't on. How about now? No, still not on? The battery's dead. Yes. This is, much better, yes. I enjoyed your presentation very much, very thought-provoking. I guess my question relates to one of your first slides, which identifies the goal of the project, and I just wanted to take a picture of it so I could quote it. If the human's body, spirit, Kwan, truly exists, what is its relationship with the human capacity of rationality? I guess if you're, the way I think of rationality, you can't take for granted that anything exists. And shouldn't the prior question, or mightn't the prior question be, does Kwan exist? Or is it a concept like many of the concepts that within the West have been abandoned by a scientific worldview, or scientific understanding, or perhaps a better way to put it is, our best understanding of what does exist and what doesn't exist. Is there any need to assume that Kwan exists, or is this just anthropology that is spelling out the implications within a particular worldview, which itself might just be a legacy of tradition and cultural beliefs, but which may not correspond to reality? That is, should we believe in Kwan in the first place? And shouldn't that be the first question that one asks, at least from a rational mindset?
Oh, thank you so much, Professor. That question helps me a lot. However, I'd like to explain more for the point of your question like this. My research would be like to explain that when we are to talk about the bodily pains, such as my arm is broken and why it cannot be used no more, things like that. Now, in the present day, we would use the sort of a scientific explanation, such as the explanation from the medical doctor, such as your arm is broken around this, around your wrist maybe, or the tissue would be injured like this, so you can use your right arm like that. And we would feel that this sort of explanation would be scientific and true. And it should be our knowledge to explain the injured arm like that, because it can be scientific. However, my point for this research work would be like, could it be that in the pre-modern era, in sort of ancient time, in every part of the world, we would have the sort of explanation like that. For people in the ancient time, our ancestors, when they broke their arms, they would have the sort of explanation for them to get their belief in their community, things like that. However, we know that they would have none of the scientific experiment, scientific instrument to get diagnosed the arms, why it is painful, why it is malfunction like that. But they would have some sort of explanation why it is, why it cannot be used. Things like, oh, the arms of the quan of your arm would now fleeing away. We are to take it back, things like that. In our own conception, in our eyes, in the modern times, maybe we would take a view of them like, oh, irrational explanation, non-scientific explanation. However, I would think that the very phenomenon of explanation of rationality, it should have been since the dawn of human era. Not just only that when we have the advancement in scientific technology, scientific medicine like this, we would have the sort of, we just only have the rationality since around this time. This is the basic words of my research work. So,
but couldn't it be that in ancient times, everyone, including Western civilization, was wrong, and that today there are many, many theories from many civilizations, and many of them are wrong, and one of them is right, and we ought to figure out which one is right and which one are all the others that are wrong? That humans have a great deal of difficulty in uncovering objective truths, especially about things that are below the level of our senses. We can't see the neural impulses and the patterns of activity in the brain that correspond to pain. It's very, very difficult. You need huge advances in science and instruments in neurochemistry, so it's not surprising that in the dawn of time they weren't particularly rational about it. They didn't have the technology, they didn't have the mathematics, they didn't have the understanding of the body, but that as we develop it, we're better placed to come up with correct solutions, even if for most of our history and most cultures, they are not particularly rational, or at least they're applying rationality, but rationality isn't enough to deliver truth if you don't have the right facts, and you can only have the right facts with the right instruments and the right techniques.
Yes, Professor, and that is the very tenet of my argument here, because from the philosophical research in rationality, it would be with the two camps of explaining the rationality, internalism and externalism. For internalism, to explain human reason and rationality, they would say that the very capacity of reason and rationality would be for every human being. But such as when we are to do A to get to the goal B, like this, someone would believe that to have fresh water, to drink fresh water A, would lead to quench that one's thirst B, nothing like this. So this very sort of action of thinking, of speaking with that sentence, if A then B like that, would be the very very sign to say that that one is already rational, because that one can say something like, if A then B, If doing A, then it would reach to B, things like that. This is the theoretical statement and explanation from internalism about reason. But the other camp would say that, no, it is wrong. Internalism about reason is wrong, because if someone would think that he or she is drinking fresh water to quench his or her thirst, but it is irrational when that one would finally find out that the very drink it is contaminated with toxic or toxicant water like that. So when you would do A to reach B, when you would you would drink the toxic water like that, you could not reach to the point of B to quench your thirst. So it is irrational for you to do that. The externalism camp would say that internalism is wrong. Just only the capacity of doing A to reach to B like that is, even though it is necessary, but not a sufficient condition for us to say that that one is already rational. Because externalism would say that the very fact that you're doing A to reach to B should get into some sort of a strong connection, also in strong connection, not from some sort of a misunderstanding like that. So for externalism would say that not every time when you would do your action of rationalizing, it would mean that you are already rational. And this is the kind of classic argument between the two camps, internalism and externalism. However, for me to explain that maybe Kwan here would be the sort of a theoretical explanation since ancient time in Southeast Asian beliefs, I would say that it is in the source of internalism. Maybe. However, your comment is good for me to develop further why internalism about reason and rationality would be strong to explain the phenomenon of rationality.
If I understand your characterization of internalism versus externalism, namely, can you evaluate the property just by looking at the contents of a person's knowledge, or do you have to also look at the state of the world? Would it not be viable to say that externalism is necessary for accounts of truth, namely, will drinking the water be good for me? In fact, you need an external approach because it depends on whether the water is pure or contains a poison. But when it comes not to truth but rationality, that is, deriving conclusions that follow from the premises, it would seem that internalism would be more natural. So for example, if I'm thirsty, if I see what I believe what the evidence suggests is pure water, if someone secretly put poison in that has no taste, no smell, that it's very difficult, but they managed to do it, but I have no way of knowing, it might be rational for me to drink the water, even though it is mistaken, or even if it's not true that it would lead to death. But for everything I know, for the premises of the argument, it still leads to the conclusion, even though in that case, one of the premises happens to be false. False from external criteria, of course. But I would think that rationality really is an entity that pertains to internal coherence of reasoning, whereas perhaps truth or objectivity or justification would necessarily be external. Does that make sense?
Yes. Maybe there is, from my reading, I've seen some too that saying that in philosophical argument between the two camps of internalism and externalism, maybe they were both wrong. Maybe just a little bit of both, both internal reason and external reason and external knowledge. Maybe a little bit of both. However, it would still be difficult for us to reach what should be the very point or the dominant point between the two. Maybe we are to develop further.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. Thank you very much. Let me introduce our second presenter. Our second presenter is Dr. Narudon Songchuchot, who is from the Faculty of Education at Kasaetsart University. Topic is motivations in online extensive reading of Thai undergraduate students. What works, what needs to be done.
Professor Pinker, once again, thank you, Kasaetsart University and Faculty of Humanities. I'm especially thankful and proud because I'm a graduate from Humanities faculty, and also would like to thank Faculty of Education. Together with me is Assistant Professor Udomlak Kunsirot, our Vice Dean for International Affairs. Thank you for this opportunity. So the topic of my talk today is actually an ongoing study. I've been active in doing what we call extensive reading, and especially in motivations, how to motivate my students, my learners in online extensive reading of Thai undergrad students. What works and what needs to be done. And before we start talking about extensive reading, let us talk about intensive reading. This is the type of reading that Thai students and Thai teachers are probably more familiar with. It's a type of assigned reading. Students read word by word and do a lot of translation, so the reading rate is very slow and no fluency in reading. Comprehension is somewhat skeptical, and normally this reading will come with short text. And the least of all, most of the time, readings of such type brings no joy, according to Renaya, Rajan, and Jacobs. And for extensive reading, this is more a tailored reading, where students read something that they find easy, but read a lot of things in various topics and independently on their own time at their own speed, even though with own speed, but because the texts are easy and fun to read, the speed of reading will be quick. And with teachers' guidance on what to read and how to read in such a way that they can read extensively. And teachers need to be a role model in this type of reading. And the ultimate goal for extensive reading is to build the joy of reading and to build the habit of loving to read. According to Gardner's, in foreign language learning, motivation refers to the effort to learn the language and desire to achieve a goal, and also positive effects in language learning. These have a lot to do with behaviors. There are two types of motivation according to Donye. One on your left is intrinsic or integrative motivation. That is the inner drive, the desire that wants to achieve, wants to read, and desire to improve or develop their language without getting any rewards. On your right-hand side is the extrinsic or instrumental motivation. This is something external, meaning they read or they learn language because they want something in return, rewards or marks, points, compliments, or incentive. In extensive reading, many studies are after the perceptions of learners in extensive reading, their attitude, and the effects of extensive reading. Fewer studies focus on motivation, or even though when they focus on motivation, they study perception, attitude, and effects in order to infer the motivations of the readers. My research question also lie on two of the most frequent ones, as I have just studied this project over a little a year. I investigated perceptions of my students, and also I tried things that that were believed to be motivating to the learners. and see how they work. So there were 58 non-English majors undergraduate students doing a weekly extensive reading of 45 minutes per week, and they will need to send a record of their reading and also do a report on their reading on a separate Google form. This reading happened online. One of the reasons is because started out during the pandemic, and because when you read online, you require much less resources in the reading against or in comparison with the hard copy books. In this case, I use a website by Professor Emeritus Rob Waring, ercentral.com, and the participants were asked to reflect on their experience on extensive reading after the first 6 weeks and after 12 weeks. And then from week 13 to 15 onward, the reading was not mandatory, meaning they had a choice whether or not to read, and they still were asked to reflect on their reading, and they were also asked if they would continue reading or not when there is no points to be given. The motivation strategies that I used is the extensive reading. This class accumulated to 20% of the whole class assessment, which is a lot. But on the side, actually for extensive reading, ideally, there shouldn't be any assessment for the students. They should want to read because they want to read. And there were also giveaways during, after the first 6 weeks. For those who read a lot, for those who put a lot of efforts, and for those who spent the most time on the reading. And then I constantly give them compliments and encourage them to read, no matter whatever levels that they were reading. So after 6 weeks, I asked them to generally give reflections on the extensive reading activity that we had been doing. 10 of them had no comments. 48 of them reflected extensive reading in a way that, I would say that a researcher or our teacher would probably want to hear. But you will see more as we go through the slides. So most of them mentioned that, they do extensive reading, and they feel that they develop their English language and they acquire more vocabulary, and they somehow develop a skill of reading. 11 of them mentioned that they were actually enjoying reading. Remember, from week 13 onward, the reading was no longer mandatory, and I asked if the participant would continue reading. The majority, of course, said no. Despite this, the red area are the participant who said no, while the blue area is the participant who said yes, they would continue reading. And voila, the number of those who expressed that they would continue reading decreased as time went by. By the end of the course of 15 weeks, the majority of them mentioned that they would not continue to read. Actually, 41% of them said so. And the reasons are they were busy with other subjects and other chores, other things in their life, and because of the materials are no longer attracted to them. And 3 of them gave out a very sincere reflection that because of boredom, that they would not want to continue reading. 7% of them undecided. 12% of them, or 7 out of 58, said that they would continue reading because it helps them develop reading skills. And overall, the behavior, meaning if you recall from before, that majority reflected extensive reading in such a positive way. However, very few expressed that they would continue to read. So basically, no marks or no rewards, no incentive, no more reading for them. And from these reflections, only very few, which is the ones that said that they would continue reading, is the type of motivation that we can consider intrinsic, which is something that we want. We want the intrinsic motivation to happen to our learners. And with 7 participants who mentioned that they would continue to read, in fact, there were only 2 out of 58 who continued to read after the course ended. And the reasons for those 2 from informal interview, one mentioned that it is their personal goal to improve the language, and because the person know that they will need the language skill in order to get a job after graduation, and because of the person also realize that they probably won't have financial support for a special tutorial for English language. The other one paused the reading for some time, perhaps for a semester, and then the person attended another class which asked them to set a goal of something and accomplish it. So the person came back to extensive reading. So what am I here today for is to hear your thoughts and everyone's discussion on the motivation of how to motivate our learners in foreign language learning, especially in my case for extensive reading, where there are lots of study confirming that extensive reading could be a way to improve the language of our learners, especially in Asian and Thai contexts. From my review, motivation and attitude and perception and awareness and demotivation and anxiety, they are somehow interconnected. And I would like to hear more. And with the rationality, the trend of the research in extensive reading tend to be going toward demotivation. But according to the rationality, knowing what demotivates learners does not necessarily mean that if you get rid of those demotives, then you would motivate your learners. So the ultimate goal is to turn the extrinsic motivations into intrinsic ones and make reading a habit and make the type of extensive reading a sustainable way of foreign language learning. Thank you.
Would you like to make some comments, Dr. Pinker? Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is working, very good. I found that very interesting. It's very compatible with certainly research from cognitive psychology that shows that people will retain material to the extent that they have to actively engage with it. And of course, the extent to which they actively engage depends on how interesting they find it, how much pleasure they get out of it. So if you have students who have a yellow marker and they read something in the old days, at least on paper, and they would just highlight with a yellow marker, that doesn't lead to very good learning. If you just have a professor standing at the front going blah, 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 just talking, that doesn't lead to good learning either. There has to be active problem solving. There has to be a conscious attempt to connect new material without what you already know. Just hearing it or just reading it, we know from cognitive psychology, is not an effective way to have people recall things. So that seems very compatible with the findings of your questionnaire, that people reading something online, if it's just passive, if they're not doing anything about it, if they don't find it interesting, it's unlikely that they will learn anything, and it's unlikely they will enjoy it, as you noted. I'm wondering how many of your conclusions pertain to learning content such as biology or history or mathematics, as opposed to specifically learning a foreign language, which together with the comprehension skills, learning a language also involves all of the social knowledge of what you say in a particular circumstance, what will make you look like a gracious, friendly person as opposed to a rude or ignorant person. There's all of the extra demands of language as a form of social communication in addition to just mastering content.
Sorry, I'm afraid I didn't get the question. Are you saying that are they having any social interaction?
No, I mentioned social interaction just to emphasize some of the differences between learning a language on the one hand and learning mathematics or biology or history on the other. So that was just explaining why there might be a difference. And my question is, do your conclusions apply to learning a foreign language or to learning anything, including subject matter like biology and history and mathematics?
In my study, I'm focusing on the motivation to learn the foreign language, but I would like to hear your thoughts on motivation on learning anything. I believe that the motivation to learn probably shares common traits across learning any subjects.
Yes, and that I think that is there are certainly commonalities that and some of the lessons that you have learned from your research would apply to learning in general, I believe.
Thank you. Any comments from the floor?
Okay, well, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
The third research project is presented by Dr. Thanasak Sirikaner from the Faculty of Humanities at Kasaetsart University. His speech, his presentation is on the effect of working memory training on L2 speech perception.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And as the title says, my research project is about working memory. This is a topic that I'm really interested in because both working memory and language is a part of our cognitive system. First of all, I would like to talk about working memory a bit. Working memory is a memory system in our cognitive system. And the model of working memory was proposed by Badri, and in his working memory model, he proposed that in nature, working memory is not just a storage, but it also includes information processing and attention and some other elements. So his model of working memory changed our view on the memory. It is quite different from the previous view on memory that we may think that memory is just a storage of information, but in actually it is not. But why I focus on working memory? Because many research found that better working memory have a very huge contribution to our life. For example, better working memory may lead to better academic performance. And better working memory can delay the onset of dementia as well. And finally, some studies found that better working memory can lead to better foreign language acquisition. So I think at this point, it is quite clear that working memory is very important to our life. And as a university lecturer, I think it will be very useful if we can integrate working memory training in our classes. But there is one problem here. How long does it take in order to improve human working memory? One study found that participants can improve their working memory scores significantly just by 10 days training. In their studies, participants need to participate in a working memory training program. It took about 30 minutes to 1 hour for each session. So the total training program may take around 10 hours to complete. So at this point, I have another question. Is it possible to have a shorter session? Because in generally, if working memory training program takes like 1 hour, it's almost impossible to integrate this kind of training in our classes. But when we look at data more carefully, you can see that the improvement from day 4 to day 10, the difference is not that big compared to the first day to the second day. So in my view, it is possible that we can see the working memory improvement by let the participant to do the training in a shorter session. So I propose 2 research questions. The first one is I want to investigate, is it possible to improve our working memory by short training session? To be more specific, it is a 5-day training program rather than 10 days. And the second, as I mentioned earlier, but better working memory implies better second language performance. And some studies also found that the effect of working memory training can lead to the improvement of non-native speech perception. And in generally, my specialized field is phonetics and phonology, so I'm interested in acquisition of sounds. So my second research question is, can working memory training facilitate second language speech perception? And my hypothesis is yes. So participants may be able to improve their working memory by a shorter session, and that training effect can transfer to speech perception as well. Okay, the next one is the experimental design. Okay, 19 participants participated in the present study, and note that the result that I'm going to present here is just a result from my pilot study. So the sample size is very small, just only 19. The age of the participants range is 18 to 20, and the L1, their mother tongue is the experiment is divided into 8 days. On the first day, all participants were tested on working memory. I used operation span task in order to measure working memory capacity. And I will show you later about the operation span task. And on the second day, all participants were tested on perception of Japanese consonants. I chose Japanese consonant because in Japanese, there are 2 consonants that it's quite difficult for Thai people to perceive. And after that, based on their perception scores, I divided participants into 2 groups. The first group is working memory group. This group received a working memory training program for 5 days. And another group is perception group. This group received perceptual training rather than working memory training for 5 days. And finally, on the 8th day, our participants were tested again on the perception of Japanese consonants. This is an example of operation span. Firstly, there will be a simple mathematical problem shown on the screen, and the participants need to solve this math problem. And then when they're finished, they have to place the finish button, and then there will be an answer shown on the screen. And they have to decide if the answer is correct or not by pressing the screen shown. And after that, there will be a letter shown on the screen, and they have to remember the letter. Note that in actually, participants have only 0.8 seconds to remember each letter. And then there will be another math problem again. decide if the answer is correct or not. And again, there will be another later. And finally, they have to recall all letters that they remember in the correct order. This is the actual screen that I used in the experiment. The original experiment was in English, so I adapted the experiment to Thai language version. Okay, the next one that I'm going to talk about is a working memory training program. I use a backward digit span task in a working memory training program. And this is an example of backward digit span task. First, participants need to remember the digit they heard. In actually, there will be a sound rather than a number shown on the screen. There was a number shown on the screen. And then there will be another digit shown again, and a new number. And finally, participants need to recall all digits in a reverse order. So for this example, the first one is the first digit is 2, and then 8, 2, 8, 4, 1. So the correct answer is, sorry, I couldn't recall. Okay, let's assume that I could recall. And during the training program, participants need to remember 3 to 10 digits. And this is a result. Okay, again, this is just a result of my pilot study. So when I finish this project, the result may be a bit different. So let's go to my first research question. Can working memory be improved by a small number of training sessions, just 5 days? And moreover, each session took only 10 to 15 minutes. And this is a result. This is pre-test. The left graph is a score for working memory. The blue one is working memory group's score, and the red one is perception group score. I just analyzed the pre-test to confirm that both groups are not different at a starting point. And here is a working memory training result. The left one is, as I said, it's a working memory score. And for working memory group, their working memory score increases around like 20%, and the difference is significant, statistically significant. While the perception group, their score slightly increased, but only about 5%, and there is no scientifically significant between the pre-test and post-test. So the answer to my first research question is yes, participants can improve their working memory just by 5 training sessions. And moreover, each section lasts only 10 to 15 minutes, which is quite different from previous studies because most studies use like 30 minutes to 1 hour training session. Now let's move to my second research question. Can working memory training facilitate second language speech perception? Here is a result of perception test. The perception score of working memory group increased around 10%, and perception group increased around 5%. But unfortunately, both groups' perception score increased just slightly, and there is no statistical difference between pre-test and post-test. So the answer to my second research question is no. Summarize findings from my pilot project. First, working memory can be improved just by 5 training sessions. The total time they spent is around 50 minutes, which is very short compared to previous studies. And this seems to be good news for us because, as I mentioned earlier, it will be good if we can integrate working memory training program in our curriculum. And findings from these studies suggest that it is possible to integrate the training program in our class. But it is also possible that training session is very short. It is too short to see the effect of working memory training. So in order to see the effect of working memory training, it's also possible to think that I may need to extend the training session to 10 days or maybe 15 or several weeks like previous studies. So at this point, I think it is still may be possible to integrate working memory in education, but the application, it can be very difficult because it took quite a long time. And okay, that was my presentation.
Thank you, Professor. Do you have comments, Professor?
A very interesting and very elegant study. I guess the way I would think of whether working memory training can enhance speech perception or phonological processing in a foreign language might depend on what you think is happening with the working memory training. That is, are people really increasing their working memory the way you might strengthen a muscle by lifting weights, where it just gets the better and better, the capacity increases? Or do people respond to the training by developing strategies that are particular to the content of the task? So I'm thinking in a backward digit span, one way in which I'm imagining if I was a subject that I might improve is, first of all, to learn chunks of successive digits that I could remember as one unit. So if it's 911, I remember, oh, that's the number that we dial for an emergency. If it's 489, I think, oh, that was the beginning of my family's phone number when I was a child. Or 451, that's the title of the famous novel, Fahrenheit 451. And as you train yourself with more and more chunks of 3 digits, you're better able to remember them because you're not remembering 3 digits anymore. You're just remembering, aha, my family's phone number, aha, emergency number. Or also, in terms of how you might recite them backwards, when you showed that keypad display, I first imagined the spatial trajectory of going through the numbers, and once I had an image of that pathway, I could just walk through it backwards. Now, other people might use different strategies, but if success at the working memory training doesn't consist of just making your working memory bigger, like expanding a muscle, but rather is acquiring a large number of strategies that help you on that very task, then there might be less reason to expect that it would give you an advantage for a very dissimilar task, like remembering the sounds of a foreign language. Do you agree that would be, and do you have reason to think that working memory can be strengthened like a muscle?
Yes, I agree with you that increase of working memory score may be just a reflection of like an acquisition of new strategy to do the task. So that is why I choose for operation span task, I use this task to measure working memory. And for training, I use another task in order to avoid the same strategy to apply when I measure working memory again. But still, there's still some possibility because even these working memory tasks, training tasks and measurement are not exactly the same task, but some strategies may be applicable. So at this point, I try to solve that problem by, firstly, I use different tasks, and then to compare with another group as a control group So if participants just like remember or acquire some new strategies. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot what I want to say.
Yeah, I understand. Good answer.
Yes, but I agree with you. And I try to solve the problem by using different tasks.
Yes.
Yeah, but still, there's still a possibility that there may be the effect of a strategy. Okay, so, and is it possible to use like a several tasks rather than just one task to solve this problem? Because one strategy may not be able to apply to all tasks that measure working memory. And I usually one task, so there may be the effect of a strategy. And what do you think if I use like a several tasks to measure working memory rather than just one task?
Yes, that makes sense, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so very much. And our fourth presentation is by Assistant Professor Jutamani Onsuwan. Is from the Faculty of Liberal Arts at the Thammasat University. The presentation is Thai Speech Sounds, Acoustic Studies, Perception Experiments, and some Research Applications. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for the introduction. And let me just probably have to time myself too. Good afternoon, everyone. And I first have to thank the organizers and Kasaetsart for inviting me and so that I have a chance to be, here with you today to share the work that I've been working with my teams for many years, and also to have a chance to listen to the session from Professor Pinker this morning. I'm not sure what kind of presentation you would expect for this session. So what I'm putting together is, because I know that some of you might not be familiar with linguistics or even phonetics, so I hope that I will give you an overview of a range of things that studying speech sounds, especially the Thai speech sound, that's what I've been doing, could actually be about, and what kind of contributions in terms of applications these studies could actually contribute to. So I am a linguist, a phonetician, so the work that I'm doing actually, I'm just part of big teams, and these are people that I've been, all the teams that I've been working with, and the work that I'll be going through would involve all the efforts from all of these people, from institutions in Thailand, including, students, former students, professors, physicians, engineers, psychologists, psychiatrists, in Thailand, and also from other countries like Australia and Japan, and also in the US. So. But if there's any mistakes and errors here, they're not theirs, it's actually mine. So, okay, I will start with introduction from Professor Pinker's book. This is actually not from the latest one, it's from the Language Instinct, which is now a very famous book. And this is, I believe, is from chapter 6, right? Yeah. So somebody's reading. I'm going to read a quote for you, and it's actually said, in the speech sound wave, one word runs into the next seamlessly. There it doesn't like me doing this. Put it back. All right. There are no little silences between spoken words, the way there are white spaces between written words. We simply hallucinate word boundaries when we reach the edge of a stretch of sound that matches some entry in our mental dictionary. Okay, so there are quite a lot of things going on here, but I would like you to focus on some words like speech sound wave, spoken words, and maybe word boundaries, okay, because these are the things that I'll be talking about. And I'm sure Professor Pinker would have a lot more to add. Okay. Because I have to first say that human language, comes in three forms, actually. It could be with spoken words, what we call speech, right? And written forms, written words, and also the last one is sign language. So what we'll be talking about, and my focus is on spoken words, which is actually speech, okay? And actually, I would like to show you this. Well, it's actually related to the word boundaries that's in that quote. For those of you who are not familiar with, looking at sine wave and the sounds, this is actually what you see when you, put your recording, speech recording onto speech analysis software. Actually, right now there's many, and you see the, sine wave on the top panel right here, and this is the formats, and these are the annotations. All right, this is from a connected speech of a Thai lady. So it means that this person is just, talking normally like that, with no pause or anything, all right? And what is she saying? She's just responding to what I'm asking her. I'm asking her whether, how would she feel if she find herself being alone, okay? And her answer, which is actually, has nothing to do with the research, but it's just so that, she would feel comfortable and could talk about, things that without pauses and things like that. So she said, yes, well, I'll be happy. Nobody is bothering me when I'm by myself, okay? All right, so that's good, sounds good. So what I would like you to focus on is on this part that I put in, the red frame here. Actually correspond to 5 syllables. ไม่วุ่นวาย ไม่มี okay? All right. 5 syllables, 5 words. And what you noticed here, it's actually, if you look at the sine wave, or the sound wave, sorry, you see that there's no boundaries, right? Actually, if I were to ask you to make a guess and say, well, how would you cut these up into 5 syllables? Would you think that's possible? Well, it's even hard for phoneticians to do that. What I'm trying to say is, this is what you hear. It is what it is in speech signal. And normally, there's not many gaps between words, and actually almost no existence. So actually what Professor Pinker put here is right. There's actually no inherent silence or gaps actually between words or even between syllables. But when we hear speech, when we actually hear words, right? We're not just hearing just a string of these things. We actually hear individual words. So these are actually, we would say, okay, 5 words, 5 syllables, okay? So it's gonna, this is a challenge, right? It's not for us if we're not looking or analyzing the waveform, but for people like children, for babies, for example, if they have to come and start learning language, and this is what they're hearing around them, okay? So they're gonna have to hear a bunch of these strings, and they have to somehow figure out how these things get carved up into words, syllables, and what you call phonemes and things like that, all right? So this is what is so special and about human speech and spoken words. And as you might notice yourself, if you listen to foreign languages that you're not familiar with, it's the same thing, right? You don't hear words, you hear a bunch of things just strung together. So it's the same kind of thing, all right? So what I'm trying to say, and I think that is Professor Pinker is trying to point out here, is that speech is special mainly because it's produced by, a complex physical system, coordination of many organs like lungs, vocal folds, tongue, velum, which are controlled by the brain. Okay, it's all come from the brain. And in the end, we get the signal or acoustic information, whatever, and it gets picked up into the ears, and the ears send those things to the brain to process in multiple level processes. So it's actually produced by the brain and it's all processed by the brain, and so in between that there's acoustic going on there, and so that's why it is so special. So because what you see here, it's the signal there's almost like no boundaries, no words segmented or anything, but it's only the brain and whatever is going on in the processing that would give you the words and the meaning that the speakers intend to convey, okay? So whatever we're talking about, we mainly look at speech production and also speech perception, and in between, and I said it's an acoustic, of the signal, and that's basically what we would cover in phonetics, and also not only in phonetics, but there are in people who are looking at processes in speech perception and also production. Those are speech scientists, psycholinguists, cognitive psychologists, and even engineers who will be, working with this kind of processes. Okay. And I think you probably would wonder. Let me go back here a little bit. When I say speech, and you also might know that there's a word that's like sound, for example, right? What is the difference between sound and speech? What about noise? What are the differences between these things? Well, actually in Thai, they're pretty much, we have probably one word or 2 words, for not separate words. But I think in English you have sound, you have speech, and then you have noise, and you even have voice. Well, you think about them, okay? I'll come back to that later, and after I finish the presentation. Okay, so this is what actually me and my team have been doing, and these are our goals. And on the left side, we would like to, with all these experiments that are going on, we would like to, the questions would be, we would like to understand how the speech, especially the Thai sounds, are, produced in terms of acoustic correlates. Of course, I don't have fancy equipment to do articulatory phonetics here, but so we could do acoustics to get to that. And also we would like to see how those acoustic correlates, or what we find in acoustic findings, how would that, those things are perceived and, you know, and interpreted by the brain by different people, like by infant, by children, by adults, and some people in clinical populations. And I also have a chance to look at how speech perception plays out in normal situation or in the lab, and also in the lab with when there's noise environment. So then when the noise is introduced into the experiments, and see how the speech perception is influenced by the level of the noise and types of the noise. Okay, and in the end, what we hope to do, and I think we do it, we actually have done it in many studies that we've done so far, is we discuss, you know, the acoustic and the perception findings and connect that with what others have been found for other languages, and that's mainly what linguists would do, okay? So I'm not gonna go into details on the right side, which is theoretical issues that this type of research might get into, but one key point that I would like to, well, two points that I would like to raise now is variations and the linguistic information for infants, okay, because I'll be talking about the baby lab that we have at Kasaetsart later on. When we talk about speech, you would probably, you read literature on speech sounds, and, you know, the linguists look at them and things like that. You will find that there are various type of variations that are just there in speech in general. And these variations are what, I mean, they're there. We have to be able to explain how, with all the variations in the speech, how human mind, human brains could process that, could overcome those variations and extract precise linguistic information, you know, despite the variations that we find in speech, okay? And I know that these issues are the things that we'll still talk about in the fields, and there's no consensus on how we would explain how we tackle variations and things like that. But there are theories that would try to give explanations to how human minds or the brains extract this kind of information. The last part, this is what I think I choose to talk about today more, is the linguistic information, or that the infants, the babies, initially perceive and acquire. Because we know that infants, you know, by the time they start saying the first word, which is about, you know, 12 months old, they already have linguistic experience. Mainly they have all the exposure of, you know, the speech sounds of their native language and whatnot. So that's the precursor to what the language is gonna come next. But we would like to also know, you know, what kind of information or what kind of things that the infants actually perceive before they actually start learning the sound of that language. How these things come about, how the development of different sounds that they hear around them, okay? Because as I say, as I stress out, the infants, before they speak, they have to be exposed to all these sounds and be able to do something with them, like, and also be able to listen to this thing and be able to carve these up into syllables and words and probably phonemes before they could start to speak, okay? All right, now I'm gonna go through list of range of acoustic studies that I have been involved in over the years, and I won't have all the time to go into details on different ones, but just to give you an idea, and if you have any question or comments on any of these, you could email me or come to me, and I could send you the paper and we could talk about it. But just to give you an idea how this speech sounds in Thai is being studied, and in acoustic terms, and also in perception, and also in research applications. Okay, so we've looked at consonants, just acoustic studies of the consonants, the stop, the nasal, the glides, and also the vowels. Nasalizations of the vowel, the nasals at the end, like those kind of things are the ones that we have looked at. And not only that, we've looked at pauses. So you might wonder, what is going on in pauses? Actually, when we say pauses, there's actually no information in the pauses, but in normal communication, you know that when there's silence and when there's pause, actually it means something, right? Nothing means something when during conversation. So and also some people, not only they do pause, they make some kind of those kind of things, and we measure those things. And that actually we measure those things and kind of classify the few pauses into different types, and try to make some kind of explanation as to how these different types come about and what they could tell us about the state of mind, or maybe the processing that the speaker is going through when they do pauses. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna skip, and then go to this one. The important part of what I'm doing right now these days is the Baby Lab, and I'll talk about Baby Lab later, but in terms of acoustic study, we also look at, because babies are not producing anything yet, right? But we look at the way the parents talk to the babies, okay? Because most adults, when they talk to babies, or even actually talk to dogs, or maybe talk to plants, I'm not sure if you adjust your speech. All right. I mean, some people don't, but most people do, and there are many ways you could, adjust your speech, and what we found is actually, well, I mean, a lot of people have studied this, and it's actually pretty across the board, and in many languages that's what parents do, but to different degrees, and but the way they do it, the adults do it, it's affected not all of the sounds, and some sounds are more affected than others, and we actually look at that, at comparing to when they talk to the babies, their babies, and also when they talk to us. So we look at how they modify their speech, and also as the baby get older, the age effect, whether the parents do things differently when the babies get older, and actually they do accordingly. And we look at the stops, and also we looked at the tones. All right, the tone is pretty interesting here, because we say that when adults do infant-directed speech, or when they talk to babies, they tend to have a higher pitch, like talking in higher pitch, and lexical tones is actually have to do with pitch. So this is how pitch would interact, okay? Because some pitch, some tones when in the infant-directed speech, they sound very different from the way they are normally produced, and that's very interesting. And we want to know how these affect the way the babies are learning these tones, and we will be looking at that too, okay? All right, so I'm not gonna go to the Lombard and speech banana, those things I'm just gonna skip. All right, now the perception. All right, I'm going over. Okay, for the perception, we also looked at, in terms of segmental, normally what we do is we have acoustic findings and we flip it around, we manipulate what we found in the acoustics and test those and see how those correlates, acoustic correlates, affect the way people or actually Thai adults perceive these units of sound. And that's actually pretty much what we do in speech perception studies. But I also work with a team of engineers, and what we looked at in extra to that is we looked at when these sounds are presented in noise. So when there's noise going around, when babble noise, white noise, and all those things, and different degrees of noise or signal to voice ratio, and then you start to see the confusions that people are making, like confusion from one sound to the other. Actually, there's patterns, systematic patterns with confusion. It's not like random things that people are doing. Normally, if you confuse one sound, like sound A with sound B, you hear A as B. In certain noise environments, it's not necessary that the B, you would hear the B and you would think that it's an A. No. It's usually just one direction, and that's very interesting. And you could use confusions to explain, well, linguists use that to explain phenomenon of sound change. And well, you could kind of make a case of why certain confusions would lead to the change in the sound patterns, over time. Okay, and also this kind of speech intelligibility is it's important for people who work in speech technology. When you have to kind of enhance certain properties of speech in certain environments, so this kind of work would give them beneficial information. Okay, and also we look at speech perception of babies, and this is the main work that we're doing at the baby lab at Thapatan. It's actually, I'm proud to say, it's the first baby lab in Thailand, and I have the Marx Institute from Sydney, Western Sydney, Australia, who actually gave me an offer 6 years ago, and when I was like, oh, I'm not sure whether I wanted to do this, but I thought if I didn't do it, I would never get this kind of chance ever again in my life, and we started the baby lab, and little by little, then finally we have collaborators. We collaborated with Riken Center of Brain Science in Japan, and which give us funding, and now we doing many experiments, and mainly phonological, looking at how babies perceive different kind of speech sounds, Thai speech sounds, and also how they segment the speech streams at what you see earlier. And we also look at, as I pointed out, the ways parents talk to the babies, and other than that, we do the survey of early word of Thai babies. So these are the ones, the projects that are going on right now at the Baby Lab. And if you are interested, or if you know anyone, or if you have babies yourself, you could check out our website. I'm sorry, I'm doing a PR thing here. You could look at our website, and we are recruiting babies. And now it's after a long break of COVID, now we are back to work, and we are running babies again in the lab. Okay. All right, so these are the face of babies and parents, and how we do some perception there. If you look into our website, you could check our video clip, and I would show you how we run perception studies in the lab with babies. Okay, now this is the last part, and I will take you for more than maybe 3 minutes max. So these are what I would like to show, how the acoustic findings, or whatever we've learned from acoustic and also in perception, actually what I've learned, and I use some of those things in some of the projects that actually actually beyond my field. But I would like to share that this is the type of work that you could linguistic or phonetics would be able to could contribute. Okay. So the first project, this one is I help create speech materials and tools for assessment of hearing deficits. So normally when you go for hearing tests as hospital, you would hear, they would test you on non-speech sounds like a beep, like a tone. You would hear something like beep, 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 and then you would also have to hear speech, because we know that for humans, speech and non-speech sounds, we process them differently. So they have to look at how you process the two of the types of signals. So and the speech ones are the ones that would have to be created for each language individually. So that's how I come in and help with the team, okay, to help create the word lists and sentence materials, and also this thing with Speech Banana that we could talk about later. And the second project, this is it's also with a team of engineering, and we come up with it's actually a set of tests, and it's computerized, and it's actually help screening Thai children at risk for learning disabilities. And this is actually a big test, consists of many parts, but the part that I was involved with is the part where you look at phonological awareness, and of course we're testing how the kids are processing the sounds and manipulation of sounds, and these turn out to be very important component in terms of assessing the learning disability and some kind of impairment, speech and language impairment. Okay, now the last two, these ones are the ones that are ongoing, and it's from the two teams from Chulalongkorn Hospital and also Srirat Hospital. Basically, and also engineering teams, and we use speech materials that are, that we extract from Midwest interview, and also from reading lists and things like that we designed, and we train that with the AI, or artificial intelligence technology, and the AI would pick up when there are a lot of features, speech features that are in the data, but AI are now learning and are trained to pick up the important ones that could help doctors evaluate, cases of early stage of Alzheimer's and MCI, and also with the depression and some other psychiatric conditions in Thai populations. Sorry, I went over time.
Okay, I regret that I think we're out of time.
Sorry, yes.
It's very interesting, very comprehensive, a lot of interesting work. If you have questions or comments afterwards, you can work through the organization to, the organizers to contact Professor. All right. Okay, now I'm going to just do a quick wrap up and then announce the next opportunity, and that is I just want to thank everyone who's been involved. This afternoon we're focusing on right now, and the four speakers want to thank you so much for contributing to the proceedings this afternoon. Thank you very much. And then the next thing we have going on are refreshments, but also the book signing. We're melding them together. So if you would like to have a book that you have with you signed by Professor Pinker, he's available for a few moments. We need to get him to his hotel before rush hour. All right. And then also refreshments are available in the lobby. So thank you so much.
I know that I haven't been who I was. I am supposed to be the one you can trust. I feel so useless 'cause I let you down. I hope there's some way I can